Hello and welcome to Advancing Innovation, coming to you live from the heart of the West End in London in our brand new Advancing Studio. Hopefully you'll see an awful lot more content coming from this studio in the coming months and years as we put out as much as we possibly can about the great things that we're doing with our customers and then also as a team. So for those of you who haven't met Advancing Innovation before, it's a conference that we run every year, and we've run it for the last 2 years in person in London. But the biggest bit of feedback we always hear from our community is, we'd love to come and watch that, but we're not in London. And so today, we're trying our very first Advancing Innovation, but online. So thank you very much for everyone who's tuning in. What we'd say is, before we kick off and run you through the agenda for today, depending on what platform you're on, you should be able to ask as many questions as you go. And so any participation that you have is greatly encouraged. So ask all the questions that you've always wanted to, easy questions, hard questions, any question that you have, stick those in the chat, and then hopefully we can answer them as we go. So as mentioned, we've got a jam-packed agenda today. So we're going to be kicking off with a keynote from Simon Whiteley, our CTO at Advancing Analytics. You'll know Simon as the figurehead of Advancing Analytics, but also our Chief Technology Officer, helping our customers ultimately achieve the best they possibly can. You'll know Simon from YouTube, from being a Microsoft MVP and a Databricks MVP. And Simon will be walking you through a lot of the key trends that you need to really be thinking about and considering around data and AI moving into next year. Following up from that, we'll be talking about how you build out a trusted data platform. Now, you can go about building the best data platform you possibly could do, but there's always this horrible number about the amount of projects in data that fail. And ultimately, the bulk of those fail where there isn't trust. And so this session will be looking at how we build trust across our data platform. Following on from that session, we'll be looking to really understand some of the trends that are happening around GenAI. If any of you have been watching a lot of the kind of keynotes from Microsoft Ignite and some of the other events recently, you'll hear a lot about agentic frameworks, about large language models. And what we're looking to do is distill everything that you need to know in some of the key trends. We'll be wrapping up our main sessions then by looking at how you strategically leverage data products. So how you move data from essentially being a cost center to a commodity that your business can use, that you can generate value from. And we've been helping customers over the last couple of years shift into this kind of thinking about how you leverage data as a product and data product thinking. And then we'll be wrapping up with a panel talking to a lot of our close friends about a lot of the content that we've seen. And so I really hope that you get as much as you possibly can out of Advancing Innovation today. Don't forget to drop all those questions into the chat. And on that, it's my pleasure to introduce Simon Whiteley, our CTO, who will deliver our very first session around key trends in data and AI. So, Simon.
All right, thank you, Terry. Hopefully that is all sounding good. I think we're good. Get a wave. Okay, AV say we're all good. So our new setup is all working nicely. So yeah, I want to talk you through, this is a slightly updated flavor of the keynote I did for the Advancing Innovation Conference we did in person earlier this year. Now, there's a lot going on in the world. Obviously, what we talk about now is even different than what we were talking about 3-4 months ago. And when we talk about the state of the industry, the state of data and AI compared to where it was 12 months ago, it's madness. It is insane how much things have actually changed. So we're going to walk through some of the overall, the hype curve, the industry trends, that kind of thing. We'll dive into a couple of specific topics. And one of the things that we always like to do is make a few tech predictions. So we'll be looking at the predictions we made last year and how true they've come this year. And we're making some predictions as to where we think things are going next year. That is our overall plan. So let's get some slides up and we can start walking through things. There we go. Perfect. Cool. Okay, so let's crack on. So first, if you haven't really come across the Gartner hype curve, it's quite kind of a common thing put out by Gartner, talking about essentially looking at, are things currently in a bit of a hype? Are they in a bit of a bubble? Essentially, has something just come introduced and everyone's in that early adoption kind of part of its life cycle. They're trying to find new use cases. They're getting really excited as they manage to solve some problems with it. But then it gets to a point when they think it can solve every single problem that's known to man, And they start slowly peeking over and going, well, maybe it's not as good as it made out. Maybe it's not a silver bullet that's going to fix all the problems in the data and AI industry or the various different tech industries. And then eventually it gets to a point where people are then going, oh God, it's just really not good at all. It can't solve any of our problems. Whereas actually all the stuff that was originally good for are still absolutely valid. And then there's a point of maturity when we've realized where it actually sits. It's matured enough that actually people can jump on it without riding the fairly scary wave of being an early adopter. And it actually plateaus into just a reasonable, good, useful tool if it makes it that far. So it generally describes things that are going on. If things are on the up curve, then it's in that hype explosion. People are starting to talk about it. People are getting too excited about it. And it's really interesting to see which ones are going up that curve and how quickly they get over that peak and start going down into that trough of disillusionment. And which ones get marked as going, you know what, we don't think they're going to stick around. And it's interesting if our ideas of what's going to stick around matches up with what Gartner come out with each year. So that is overall what we're looking at. Now, to kick things off, the interesting thing that happened last year. So obviously, AI, the hype curve, generative AI was right at the top. No surprises there, right? GenAI suddenly exploded onto the scene at the start of 2023, or kind of became mainstream around the start of 2023, and everyone leapt on it as the next big thing that's going to fix everything in the world. Now, the inclination is to think, oh, okay, it's going to start going down. We're going to go into that trough of disillusionment, and actually it's not really going to be around for that much longer. Obviously, we've seen that's not the case. Not the case so much, in fact, that they actually split off into its own hype curve of its own. So rather than actually now just being a technology which is on the AI hype curve, there's now a separate hype curve just for Gen AI, which kind of makes sense because it as a technology, it's moving so quickly. It's moving in a completely different direction. And there's just new tech that keeps coming on, new phrases that suddenly become the thing that we talk about constantly. So if we look at the hype curve for Gen AI, that tells us a slightly different story. It's not this idea that Gen AI itself is going down, but elements of it, people will be a little bit disappointed with. Elements of it are just being introduced and suddenly exploding up, and everyone getting really excited about it, and then writing on their products so they can then talk to you about it. So this whole idea of what's hot and what's not in terms of Gen AI, basically as of last year, and we've got the updated one for this year. No real surprises, some of the things that are maximum on the hype curve, because if we're talking about things like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that's basically everyone's favorite thing in 2024. So if you're doing a Gen AI POC, if you're talking to a consultancy and they're trying to sell you their next big Gen AI thing, they're probably trying to sell you a RAG model. And RAG's essentially when you do a search, instead of having to include all the information in your prompts to make sure it doesn't hallucinate, instead at runtime, it goes off, looks inside a vector database, brings back something and embeds it into your prompt. So essentially, you're going to ground that prompt with some real world information. So rather than saying, what's my HR policy for this? And you go ask OpenAI, and OpenAI has no idea what the answer is. You ask it saying, here's the context of my HR policy. Can you please answer a question based on this? And do its reading, and it'll tell you your HR policy states this. Far more useful in the real world, which is why we've seen it explode so much. So there's no real shock there that RAG and vectors and those kind of things are the top of the hype curve, because that's what everyone is doing currently. But then the other things are always interesting. So multimodal Gen AI is another one we're seeing kind of far lower. It's currently on that explosive rise up the hype curve, talking about essentially, what about if we ask questions, include images and voice, or if we ask something voice and it converts it to text and then summarize it? What about when we have lots of different types of prompt, types of information, and we mix it together? That's kind of becoming much more common. We're seeing that kind of explode, but it's not as mainstream yet. So it's that idea about where things are going, and essentially gives you a hint. If it's low on the hype cycle currently, we're probably going to see lots of people talking about it in 4 or 5 months' time. So it's interesting now, but the big one, the one that is actually, I reckon, is much further up the hype cycle when this hype cycle was actually created back in July, is the agentic models, autonomous agents. Now that has captured people's imagination. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but essentially it's the whole idea of basically workload automation. So rather than the idea of saying, I'm going to ask a question and it's going to generate me some text as a response, I can ask it a question, or I can tell it something's happened. It then makes a plan about what it would do to resolve that, and then goes ahead and does it. And that's the big, big change. Rather than it being purely theoretical text or image generation, it's actually going and calling APIs. It's going and raising service requests. It's actually impacting the real world. So that is a big, big thing that we're suddenly now seeing the big shift to, is the autonomous agents. And the business opportunity of being able to automate workloads from it is fairly huge. So expect to hear lots of things of people talking about agentic frameworks, semi-autonomous agents, autonomous agents, big, big things that's happening in the industry right now. So we'll touch a little bit more on some of those things, but you should be aware that that's essentially where GenAI is going. Now, on the more traditional data management side, you've got some things that is always nice to see. Apparently, data engineering has left the trough of disillusionment. I don't know if anyone's told all the data engineers out there, but still, it's always nice to see that we're no longer in the bottom of that trough currently. But there's some other things that are happening. So data mesh, we saw right to the top of the hype curve last year, and we're kind of sitting there going, really though? Because do you really want all that info out there? And then we saw kind of this disillusionment. We saw people going, it's not actually that pragmatic, not actually that practical. You can take flavors of it. There's loads of great ideas you can pull out of data mesh. And honestly, at Advanced Analytics, we saw the greatness that you can do from federated analytics and going, yeah, distributed workloads, distributed responsibility is great. But a fully fleshed data mesh, probably not sensible or achievable for the majority of organizations. Now, on the Gartner hype curve, that's now marked as going to be obsolete before it plateaus, partly because they believe that people are building data fabrics, which is a slightly more flexible approach, less constrained in terms of the dogmatic approach to it. So it's interesting seeing where that's going. One of the things that came out of data mesh is a renewed interest in data as a product, of data products. Now, we've seen a huge amount of that in 2024. Essentially, people going, well, yeah, I've got a data model out in the world, but what if I actually put some rigor and constraints around it? What if I gave a SLA around it, a service level agreement to my users going, it'll be this amount of accurate, it'll be this timely, you'd updated this regularly, it will have the documentation I would expect if I bought a product. All of those trappings and all of the ways of doing product management, prioritizing features based on the value that they deliver, these are all fantastic concepts that we've been desperately trying to get the data industry to adopt for years. And the fact that data mesh suddenly exploded and gave rise to the popularity of that thinking once again, and suddenly everyone's adopting it, is fantastic. So we're seeing huge amounts of thought leadership around data products suddenly entering the industry. Loads of stuff going on there. Finally, if you're going to do a data product, if you're going to actually hold yourself accountable with real world data about actually why it's good, why it's bad, you need the data for it. And so there's been a mad focus on observability, on the ability to have data about your data, and be able to get all of your data platforms pumping out telemetry so you can actually do some analytics to work out how much did it cost me to make that data product? How many people use it? What's the value I'm getting from it? These are all things we should be measuring and treating things as data driven, but we never do. So this big, big focus this year has been on these tools coming out, making governance more pervasive, making data more observable, and actually building it in. And then also, as we hand away the keys of control to some things like serverless and say, actually, you know what? I don't want to do fine-tuned control over my compute. Can someone just do it for me? The flip side of that is, what control do you have over the finances? How do you control what you're spending? How do you automate the management of your spend across this growing amount of federated platforms? Well, that's what we're seeing in terms of FinOps. And there's plenty of tools appearing, plenty of evolution in the various data platforms that we use that support that. So tons and tons and tons of things happening all across. And it's great to see that innovation. So of different things going on. Now, of these things that are currently happening, of these things that are on the hype cycle and that we're looking at when we're looking at it in 2023, how well did we do? That's the question we always like to ask. How accurate were our predictions? So when I was putting together Keynote last year, I came out with a couple of areas. One, pervasive AI. No real shock there. The GenAI was at the top of the hype curve. We're going to see more and more of that stuff happening. So engineering and analytical co-pilots. Suddenly, people are going to start using them. They're going to appear everywhere. I've given that a tick, obviously. We've got things like the Databricks Assistant suddenly appearing more and more. I keep running training sessions, and every time I try and show someone how to write the code badly, it's already correcting my code before I've finished writing it, and it makes it hard to do things wrong, which is great. We've got Copilot appearing absolutely everywhere. If you saw Microsoft Ignite, Copilot was just the key leading bit of message that was over and over again. It is pervasive everywhere we see. So I'm giving that a tick going, yeah, it's pretty much everywhere. We talk about AI data generation. We've seen bits and pieces of it. You can do some things. I'll show you something in a second where we're starting to see it more and more, but it's not as pervasive as we thought it would be. We thought we'd see people generating test data sets and clicking a button to go, you know what, I don't want to make my prod data and have to obfuscate it to make my test and dev data. We can just automate that stuff. And we've not seen as much of that as we're kind of expecting. AI-based data cleansing, I've not seen any of. I'm convinced it's going to happen at some point, but we haven't quite seen that start to fit into our world yet, but I still think it's coming. And AI-directed governance, we've actually been seeing for a little while. If you're in things like Unity Catalog, it's now just saying, hey, look, let me take a stab at giving a description to your table, to your schemas, to your various different columns within your tables. It's not saying it's going to get it perfectly right, but it's taking away 60, 70, 80% of the work. So you've got no excuse not to document your data. And we're seeing that more and more. We're seeing that appear into other tools. Everything is starting to have a little bit of GenAI to help you get where you need to be. So we did pretty well on that side of things. On the other side, federated analytics, with the rise of data mesh, but the skepticism around data mesh, we're expecting to see more people having central data platforms or centrally managed frameworks, but then cookie cutter franchises across different analytics teams. And we're seeing that more and more. So central framework teams, we've seen that. Engineering teams managing the master engine and pushing that out. We've seen data product thinking, again, massively taking off. It's been, again, had real traction and caught people's imagination. And we keep coming to people, talking to them, saying, what challenges are you having? Like, we're having problems actually rolling out our data as a product methodology. Or we built some data products and they're not getting the traction we want. How do we fix it? It's a key thing on people's mind because people are trying to do it out in industry. Distributed analytics ownership, yeah, we're seeing people in the early formation part of trying to do it. We're seeing people put as a flag in the ground saying that's where they want to go. Not out there as much as we thought, but serverless everything we have just seen explode. So certainly if you're in the world of Databricks, you'll have seen it. So the fact that you can now run, serverless SQL we've been able to do a while, but things like serverless notebook, serverless workflow, serverless DLT, all these different serverless offerings have actually exploded. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But certainly, it's definitely something that we're seeing out in industry. And then finally, on the AI side, like prompt literacy, the kind of people embracing it and it becoming part of what they're doing, we're seeing more and more things starting to appear. So GenAI is consumer tech. Absolutely, we're seeing that in there. So things like in both Databricks and Fabric, you can have a bunch of SQL functions that run AI for you. So rather than you having to think of the whole prompt, if I was trying to extract some information from a load of text, I wouldn't have to craft a massive prompt telling it how to go about identifying a person. Instead, I can call the AI extract function inside Databricks, point it at a column of data, and it will do the extraction for me, no matter if I just make up the tags I'm looking to extract. And there's an element of that in terms of the data generation, which we actually are starting to see. But that's getting so much easier without people needing to know a lot around how to write a good prompt. Without having to know any prompt engineering, they're starting to be able to do this kind of stuff, which is great. I did have company prompt libraries as something that had completely failed. I thought it was going to happen, and I had to hold my hands up earlier this year and say, it's not going to happen. But actually then, Ignite, a few weeks ago, we saw Copilot Prompt Gallery, which is exactly that. It's saying, well, actually, if you've written a really good prompt and you love the results, save it, put it in your gallery. Other people using Copilot can then pull it down and run the same prompt. That is what we thought we'd be seeing. Happened a little bit later in the year than we thought, but hey, I'll take that as a bit of a win. And then finally, AI-served analytics. This is the whole generative BI. Now, that is something we kind of had an inkling was coming, and then we've seen appear more and more. It's not had the same traction we're expecting, but we're expecting a lot of work to get it to where it needs to be. So we'll talk more about how that's going to work. So if people are actually, rather than going and opening a dashboard, just asking a question, and that question is going off, interrogating the data, giving them a single serving dashboard, they get the answer, and then they move on, is going to change the way we think about data. So yeah, we're seeing these things. We're seeing these things actually appear. So we've got 3 points that we want to go and have a quick walkthrough to go, what do these actually look like? Firstly, generative BI. I need to make this differentiation. You've got a Copilot, which is helping a developer build something. And then you've got true generative BI, which is answering a question and replacing traditional dashboard, traditional analytics. Two very, very different ways of working. One is still just a developer accelerator. The other one is changing the role of how we interact with analytics. But we are seeing both kind of explode onto the scene. So if we go with the first, I've got a few different scenarios about how that would work. So in the top picture, I've got my exec who's fairly tech savvy. And they're going to go open a dashboard to answer their question, and then go, well, this doesn't quite explain it. That figure, I need more info. And they'll export it to Excel. Of course they will. and then they'll go and do a bit of their own number crunching and answer their question for themselves. Now, not everyone is that data savvy, not everyone is data literate. So there's the other person who likes to go, hey, analyst, go and answer this question for me. And then the analyst will just open up some dashboards that I've already built, answer the question. If they can't, well, they'll go and write some SQL and they'll work out how to answer the question and then go back with the answer. And then the final one, there's the exec who goes, no, my gut's better than numbers. I don't need dashboards. So those three different scenarios, the very self-sufficient to the, I got someone to do that for me, to the, I don't really care. Three different scenarios we see quite often with data leadership. So switch that around and say, how does Copilot actually interact with that? Well, in the top one, essentially, rather than the export to Excel, it's the, I check my dashboard, I try and answer a question. If I can't answer the question, I then jump into my generative BI and say, how do these things relate? And get the answer. I serve myself the answer, but I use it to fill in the gaps. I'm not replacing dashboards with it, but that ad hoc extra questions, I'm now serving myself because I've got generative BI. In the next one, my data analyst is essentially using it themselves in the same way. So my exec still goes to my data analyst, they still go to their dashboard, but then if they have to answer a question, it's a SQL accelerator. Rather than have to figure it out and write and hand crank the SQL themselves, it'll just write the SQL, answer the question, but also provide the learnings and go, here's my working out. This is the SQL that I wrote to do it, so we can check and make sure we are right. In the final one, honestly, I found lots of leadership teams who are actually fairly skeptical, would never go to a dashboard, never pull numbers out, that their gut feel kind of people have jumped onto ChatGPT and actually happily asking it questions and find that more natural. So there's a whole bunch of leaderships who would never really interact with data before, who now, if they've got this generative BI, would actually quite happily serve themselves. So it's an interesting idea. Obviously, there's still some that will never look at anything and we can't really help them, but it's adding another tool to try and get people more data savvy, more data literate. The big problem is getting people to trust it. And that's the phase we're going to be in for a little while. Well, these generative BI tools are currently out there, but everyone, because we had the massive hype last year of generative AI, and we saw all the hallucinating it can do, people got excited, and then they started to lose trust. Oh, what if it makes up data? What if that's a lie? What if I can't trust that? And people are looking at that and asking the same about their data. So currently, all of the generative BI tools we're seeing are going out of their way to say, hey, look, you can trust me. Here's my working out. Here's the SQL. This is the code I wrote to answer the question. So it's not really quite for the execs yet. It's more as a speed up tool for data analysts who can check the working and go, yeah, honestly, that's right. And when it gets to the point when it's been right so many times in a row, the analysts are like, I trust it. It's going to give you the right answer. That's when we'll suddenly see it go more mainstream and be adopted by the wider business. But that's kind of the curve that we're in with Gen BI. So yeah, how do you get ready for it? Well, you need a good solid data foundation. Generative BI is far better on good, well-modeled data that is well explained and well governed, well documented. It's not an exciting answer, but to make generative BI better, you need to actually have a good, solid data platform that is well modeled and well documented. But you also need to have people be more data literate. They still need to ask questions in the right way with some of the tools that are out there. Maybe that's going to change when we get into the next second generation of these things. But currently, you need to be able to know how to articulate a question, know the kind of things it can answer and the kind of things it can't answer. And then you can actually get lots out of these tools. So switching on, pervasive governance. Another thing I mentioned about just starting to see governance as actually less of a thing that you have to hit people over the head with, less of an arduous task that you don't really want to do, but you kind of feel you should, but more of an enabler for so many things. And we started to see that attitude shift. Now, it's a weird one, because things like data governance, data security, modeling my data, data observability, these are all things that we cared about 10 years ago when we were kind of in a very different tech stack. But there's a whole maturity curve we go through. Whenever we adopt a brand new tech paradigm, we moved from relational databases to pure lakes. We moved from pure lakes to lakehouse style paradigms. There's always a step back in maturity you make. And now lake houses, the whole way that everyone's working, you've got a load of delta in a lake. You've got some distributed compute like Spark. Well, that meant there was a step back in maturity originally, but now we've accelerated and we've gone past where we were. So now things like governance are more important than they used to be. But it's just taken a little while to catch up to it, rather than can it just work? Can it join it properly? We're now at the point when maturity is what matters. So looking at that, there's a whole maturity curve. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper into data governance depending on what you're trying to unlock. Now, yes, lots of people have no governance. Some people have got little pockets of documentation, hold it in SharePoint, keep it in an Excel file. It's not really going to enable much. As you go deeper into it, and you actually start to adopt specialist tools for it, you start to push it out, you start to bring in specialist teams. It's someone's responsibility in the business to look after it. Or you see this mature, you go deeper and deeper into actually what you're enabling with it. But why? Why actually go that mature? Why go to those levels? Well, over on the other side, we can kind of say, well, first, if you want true self-service doesn't really exist unless people can actually trust and work with the data and don't need to go and ask someone's help in order to serve themselves. So there's a minimum point of data governance you need before you can actually start to get there and move on properly. And then data products. We talked about observability and data quality and all those bits that you need to have in there to actually treat data like a product. Well, that requires a minimum amount of governance. So all the benefits and ways of thinking and embracing the speed you can get from data products, well, that requires a level of governance. And finally, the whole thing everyone's excited about, generative BI and generative AI on top of your data, that needs really strong data foundations. So now that's like a good hook. It's like the carrot to tempt people into doing governance properly is now, but you can unlock all of these other things. So it's seeing more people than ever really strongly embrace data governance and actually want to give it a big strategic focus, not because of it itself, but because of what it unlocks, because of actually they're starting to see that building a foundation enables so many of these things, which is great. Serverless everything, I just want to put a nod to, because every time, I'm an engineer, right? Every time I speak to any of the data engineers about things like serverless and embracing serverless, I get the same reaction going, oh, I don't like it. I lose all my control. I have to give away all of the things. I want like knobs and dials so I can finally tune everything. And I just, do you need to? I mean, if you look at all the different things that we used to do to manage a notebook, you know, we could have a bunch of notebooks and we need to plan out all the different execution plans. We need to manage the different versions of the runtime it's running on. We need to think about, for a Spark cluster, how many machines and which machines and how many of them and how many cores. There's a whole bunch of decisions, which is essentially a barrier to entry for a lot of people. It's a specialist job to decide what kind of compute you need to run a load of workloads, whereas it doesn't need to be. So that's what serverless is trying to solve. It's trying to solve we don't need to do that. We don't need that level of problems then. We want to step away from it. We want it just to go, yeah, just run it, and it'll run. It doesn't need that level of thinking. But people look at that with skepticism and go, oh, but I'm giving away control. I can't do anything with it. What if it's slow? What if it costs too much? I'm giving away the keys. Now, again, a lot of that is about trust. But trusting that it's going to run in the right way. It's going to do the things that we need it to do. Now, the big thing there is how much time engineers actually spend doing what engineers should be doing. And that's the debate. What should a data engineer be doing? Currently, the majority of their time is performance tuning. It's planning. It's explaining why someone wrote something that goes slowly. Whereas if things get a little bit more hands-off, a little bit more black boxing, and we can take a step back and go, it's just going to run and it's going to work and it's going to go fast and it's running in my interest, well, then I can spend more time actually getting data into the hands of the people who need data and actually make better decisions with it, consult them to do better things with their data. I can spend more of my time adding value. And that's where we've got a little bit lost as data engineers. We spend so much time just tweaking the knobs and dials to make things go fast. We kind of forget that we're only making it go fast because we want the business to have more data and to do more with it. So generally, this trend is a good trend, but it requires trust. We need to say, I believe you're out to actually make things better for me. It's a big piece. Finally, the final piece I want to put a little bit of focus on, agentic frameworks. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. But this whole idea of saying, I've got an agent as opposed to just a large language model is the big change to how we think about things. So going from this idea of I'm writing a prompt and I get a response, and I can ask it, how would you solve this problem? And it'll go off and it'll think about that problem and it'll say, here's the steps I would go through to solve that problem. Instead, with something that is an agentic framework, something that is going to be an autonomous agent, it's got a lot more things it can do. It might have things like retrieval augmented generation, it's going off and pulling some data in. It has a bit more memory and reasoning about what it's done in the past. It's got tools and skills. So we've actually hooked it up to be able to do things. Maybe it knows certain APIs it can call, certain SQL queries it can run. We've hooked it up and said, here's a load of abilities that you have. You can use them in your plan if you see fit. So rather than that straight plan that it had, it can now go, well, yeah, you've asked, I would go and write a query. Well, actually, I'm going to check the metadata, look at the metadata, call something to write a query and write a query, execute it, look at the results. It's actually doing tangible things. That's not talking about that whole workload automation piece in terms of actually saying, I used to spend half of my time filling in a form, clicking a button, sending it over, and making sure it was okay. Actually, I can just have an agent do that for me now and spend more of my time doing more valuable things. Now, obviously, that captures people's information to go, hey, I don't need a real team anymore. Obviously, it is not to replace people because actually it doesn't quite work for those ways that you think. But can it save people a huge amount of time? Can it make your people more effective? Can it actually make us just have more time to do things that actually matter? Absolutely. So there's a huge amount of interest in this kind of agentic framework that's going on currently. Now, to wrap things up in the last 2 minutes, I'm going to talk about what's going to happen next year, or at least what our predictions are, what we think we're going to be seeing essentially on the hype curve. There's a bunch of things around engineering. The SaaSification of engineering is going to continue. So not just serverless everything, but just essentially a lot of the things that we're currently doing where we need to write custom code for, because we're at this point of maturity in the platforms, we're going to see less and less of that. We can see the converging of standards across things. We saw Databricks earlier this year announce the acquisition of Tabular, essentially bringing the people who invented Iceberg on. So actually both the Delta guys and the Iceberg guys can kind of work together. This whole idea that lots of these different open source standards are, one, being open source, or two, talking to each other and collaborating. And we're going to see this kind of merging towards everyone's kind of working in the same way, doing the same things, hopefully, unless something massive new comes out and disrupts it. That's a good thing for us, because essentially it makes our skills more portable. It means we can do more with our platforms. The focus on governance isn't going to stop. Now, the governance tools that we're seeing out there, they do a lot, but they're not quite finished yet. There's a lot more that we can do out of it. Disruption of classic data teams is an interesting one. If GenAI really, really takes off, and we see people, we're not going to see people stop building dashboards, but we don't need to build a dashboard to do absolutely everything. It's more topping up what dashboards that we have and building it out there. And see them focusing their time on different things is the main thing. We're going to see the explosion of KPI problems as because of GenAI in terms of how it works currently. So currently I can go, hey, go and measure churn, I think is the example we see a lot of. And GenAI can do things like tell us, how would you define churn? I don't have a definition saved. And it waits for the user to define it. But if that's the way it works and everyone defines it differently, we're going to have the age-old problem of lots of different KPIs. So there's challenges we're going to see people trying to solve in terms of that GenAI problem. Data literacy isn't going to go away. We're going to need that to keep moving. We're going to see FinOps. Again, if I'm pushing all of my stuff to serverless, if I'm giving away the keys and my control to how these platforms are working for me, I also want to be able to automate how much I'm spending and how they're deciding to spend the money. I want to be able to actually have more control without having to physically do the control bits myself. It's going to be a big focus on actually how do we do that. And we're going to see lots of people accidentally spend money. We're going to see people just turn things on, spend a bit of cash, and then get a little bit scared, which you don't need to be. You just need to have the right controls in place at the start. Finally, the AI evolution is obviously going to keep going. So we're going to see way more focus on agents. We're going to see the commoditization of agents. We already saw that with Ignite starting to happen, with the ability to have Copilot Studio with the skills you can give it separated from the full LLM building areas. We're going to see a lot more stuff happening there. I still think data synthesis is going to happen. It's happening a lot for machine learning models. But I still think there's a lot more commoditization around engineering and generally warehousing and traditional analytics. AI regulation is kind of going huge. So we're going to see more of that, especially in the EU. So there's a lot of questions about what people can do and kind of where we're going to do with things. A lot of explainable AI comes into the whole regulation piece. And small language models. We don't just need a massive generalist model, but agent frameworks and a mixture of small experts, agents, kind of enables us to have actually smaller, cheaper specialist models and use it in a mixed array. We're already seeing that start to take off, and agents are really going to push that up the hype curve. But I reckon we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it next year and seeing tools come out. So what should you be doing? You need to be adapting and evolving. You need to be looking at this stuff and planning for it. Thinking about how you adopt these things. Thinking about how you embrace this stuff. You need to be driving your data literacy campaign, getting ahead of it. You need to be getting people aware of AI and actually how they should be using it, which tools they should be using, what they shouldn't do with it, when they shouldn't send data to an open source third-party model. You need to be careful about this stuff, but you need to train people about it. We're going to see strengthening in terms of the core skills, governance, in terms of managing costs, in terms of measuring the value of data products, of AI, of all these different investments that we're making. What are you getting out of it? We're going to see this big, big push for it. And definitely, you're going to succeed as a business if you're treating data as a product. If you're looking at it and going, which of these models should I build? Well, the one that delivers value, the one that delivers the most value should always be the way that we're prioritizing. But we kind of lost our way as data teams in terms of doing that. So a return to that form is how you can protect yourself against the ever-changing future. So yeah, huge amounts going on, but it's a pretty exciting future. All right, I'm going to hand back off. I'm going to crack on back to Terry to introduce our next guest.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed that session by Simon. Now, I think you'd have seen, right, everything that Simon is talking about there, it's really all about really having to be underpinned by a platform that you trust. You think about trying to do ultimately generative BI, right? As Sai kind of has mentioned, there's a whole load, or if things start moving towards that, really everything needs to be built out on a platform that is all about trust. And so that really leads us into our next session. And our next session is going to be presented by Zach Stagers. And Zach is our head of data engineering. So Zach's role and responsibility is really focused around driving our data engineering projects successfully to completion with our customers all over the world, really supporting them to build the very best platforms that are right for them, that are solving their challenges, and now are ultimately built on a solid platform of trust. So Zach, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Terry. Thanks for the introduction there. So yeah, as Terry said, very quick recap. My name is Zach Stagers. I'm the head of data engineering here at Advancing Analytics. And the session I'm going to take you through today is a slightly extended version of the presentation I gave at the in-person version of this event. So let me share my screen and we'll start going through some slides. Okay, should be able to see my slides now. So last year at the inaugural in-person Advancing Innovation event in London, myself, East and Gavi, who you'll hear from later, our head of analytics and AI respectively, we spoke about progressing through this data and AI maturity curve. And we approached that topic from a reasonably technical perspective, talking about things like platform scale and processing flexibility. And whilst those topics are incredibly important, the fact remains that you could build the most well-engineered data platform in the world, and you may have big plans to kind of integrate all of the different departments across your organization and break down those data silos and get everyone talking the same language. But if you're missing one key ingredient from your platform, your organization is likely to lose faith in that data platform and probably stop using it altogether. And as the introduction probably alluded to, that one ingredient is trust. Trust is that critical ingredient that must be considered from the absolute beginning. Now, trust is earned, as the old saying goes, right? You have to work at building trust and maintaining trust, more importantly. And if trust is lost, it can be incredibly difficult to reestablish, right? Rebuild that trust. So in this session, we're going to discuss some of the ways that you can build trust throughout the implementation phase of a data platform. And then we're going to kind of double click on some of the key data quality issues that we see and you'll want to avoid to maintain trust over the long term. So how do you actually build trust in a data platform when the work it does is largely behind the scenes? End users don't tend to see the sophisticated ingestion and processing patterns that you and your team have elegantly designed and implemented, right? So instead, it's much more common that the outputs of the data platform, or which the data platform underpins, such as dashboards and AI models, are the things that users are actually interacting with, they're actually using and seeing and experiencing. So we'll talk through that kind of implementation phase and the things you should be looking to do to try and build trust throughout that phase. And it's important to start by simply explaining to your user base why you're building a data platform and how it's going to benefit them individually as well as the organization. And some common questions that typically need to be conveyed and covered in these sessions include, how is a data platform going to save us time, right? How is this going to help us shortcut from A to B? Why does a data platform lead to better decision making? And what will a data platform enable us to do today that we can't already do with our data and our platforms? Again, all of this ties together, because a lot of things you may be able to do with an awful lot of human hours and power poured into that. So kind of bringing it all together to say it's going to save us time to be able to get from point A to point B. But alongside explaining why we're doing this, it is very important to pick a narrow focus and to start small. So pick a small area of value to get started with. Find something which today takes many hours of manual work to pull together, or find a key metric that you aren't able to reliably measure today and start by automating those processes. Then build on top of that, deliver incremental value by working in an agile manner. And once you've delivered that single, previously unmeasurable or difficult to measure metric, start to expand out from there. What other KPIs would that team need to view alongside that initial KPI to give them a total view of their business area? And lastly, the executive dashboard should come last, right? A lot of people make the mistake of starting there, and you should end there. So the exec dashboard tends to cover the A to Z of an entire business, and that therefore directly goes against starting small. So instead, pick a small value case within each department in each area and build up to the executive dashboard, covering all areas of the organization. Next up, it's important to involve people. So keeping people informed and involved goes a long way to building trust. So it's important to identify champions within your organization, people who operate outside of the core delivery team, but can help drive adoption and future developments to the platform. Keep the wider audience involved all the way from that initial explaining why session at the very beginning of this slide deck, right the way through to requirement gathering, development, testing, all the way through to the first release and beyond. So this can be achieved through things like open playback presentations, holding Q&A sessions, and sending regular email updates about the platform and status reporting and that kind of thing. The ultimate goal here is to create a sense of shared ownership. If everyone essentially wants the initiative to work, then it's more likely to succeed. And then teach people. So people can be a little scared of using things that they are unfamiliar with, or either out of fear of the unknown, or that they may accidentally break something, right? If people are unfamiliar with these things, they just may not know that it's actually quite unlikely that using it is going to cause some kind of breakage. So to do that, some of the things that Simon covered during that keynote session, make sure you hold data literacy clinics. Teach people to question the source of information and data. How to interpret data through tables, graphs, and dashboards, right? Teach people how to do that. Teach people how to understand and recognize quality issues within the data and how those should be handled if they do identify a quality issue, even if that is just raising it to someone else within the organization to deal with that. So it's also critical these days to teach people about having an awareness of ethical and legal data usage. You know, think about things like GDPR, how data should be used, the right to be forgotten, things like that. But beyond some of that kind of just basic data literacy concepts, go a little bit further. Explain some of the basic data concepts conducted within the data platform to help demystify it. Talk about what data cleaning is and what it means for data to be dirty. We'll cover that in a short while. What is data integration? What is a data model? And how do all of these topics relate to one another? And just describe the processes that the data goes through and some of the complexities involved with those. Now, they don't need to be experts in all of these concepts. That's exactly the point of the data engineering role. And that is why I personally do not believe in the idea of citizen ETL. But with users having an idea of the complexities involved, it helps provide context when things like timelines are discussed for new developments and whatnot. Okay, we're going to hop in now to talk about maintaining trust before we kind of double click onto some of those data quality problems that we mentioned. So maintaining trust is a marathon. It's absolutely not a sprint. It's about putting processes in place to keep the platform in good shape over the long run. And we'll dive into those shortly. But quickly, it is to look after data quality, wrangle master data management, automate micro and macro data testing, have your platform sniff out errors at both an individual row level, but also the entire data set level to get ahead of any potential corrupt data being put in front of the end users. That's something we've done with our customers. Utilize alerting within the platform to be proactive about detecting and communicating pipeline failures instead of waiting for end user complaints to start rolling in as your alert mechanism for any kind of issue. Publish statistics, so monthly stats like volumes of data that have been ingested and processed, the number of queries that have been processed, the number of stories that have been developed can help people continue to see value in the platform in the long term. And then lastly, create an opportunity for continued engagement. Once people get their hands on that first data asset, that first thing that you've pulled out of all of those source systems by connecting those together, the creative juices tend to start to flow for other things that can be automated in their area. So make sure that you provide some kind of mechanism for capturing those future requirements from stakeholders. Okay, double clicking now into data quality and some of the common challenges that we tend to see within data platforms. So, example here on the screen, there's actually 3 distinct problems being displayed within this table. There's duplication in the city column. There's also some accuracy issues and there's some consistency issues. So Cincinnati spelled wrong multiple times, and whilst the country column is accurate, it is inconsistent. So all of this is not going to group up nicely and aggregate nicely, which can lead to problems querying. Now, I personally used to work for an organization in the automotive industry, and we experienced this exact problem with tire data. And you wouldn't believe how many different ways people can spell continental tires. And yeah, finding a solution to that can be challenging. And it may require working with source system owners to put things in place to resolve the root cause of this. Or it may be as far as having to implement some kind of master or reference data management solution. Another one is that column names on this table, for example, are unclear. So making the table much more difficult to work with and to discover those data assets in the first place. So these should be renamed during pipeline processing to support discoverability and querying. We also see a lot of issues with referential integrity, which can lead to inaccurate, misleading, and inconsistent results. If 2 people write their queries in slightly different ways, one uses an inner join versus a left join, you may get a different answer if you were to sum that total column. So you need to decide whether order number 4 in this instance should be included, or whether there should be an unknown member included in that customer table to give you something to join to, essentially. Okay, another one. So data points which are not easily interpreted or human readable are often slow to work with and difficult for users to understand on the fly. Now, this can be particularly challenging for onboarding new members to the data platform, and say you have a new member of staff and they need to start to understand all of these codes. So the solution here would again be some kind of reference data, or some way to translate these into what the actual definitions are. Poorly designed analytical models are slower and more difficult to navigate, requiring a far deeper understanding of the tables and their relationships to be able to query. And this again leads to really inconsistent results, as one person may have a different interpretation as to how to navigate that model compared to another. Solution here is to simplify. Now, we use processes called Sunbeam and tend to align to Kimball style models, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that shortly from our head of analytics East. And of course, technology plays a vital role in building trust in organizational data to help ensure accuracy, integrity, compliance, and fostering confidence in data-driven decision-making. And there's a ton to choose from, and of course, many more than the big vendors on the screen here. We won't cover all of these, but just to call a couple of these out, we have Purview, Monte Carlo, Unity Catalog, and it could be all too easy to get lost in a sea of tool selection, right? So my advice here is, again, to start small. We're advancing a line particularly with Databricks, and find that Unity Catalog covers most of our customers' requirements. So start there, and if there's a significant gap which can justify the expenditure that's often required for some of these other tools, then that's the point, that's the trigger to start to explore the market for other tooling and options. But there's broadly 4 categories in which any one of those tools can be put into, or multiple of those tools, multiple categories. And they are governance tools. So generally a broad term for multi-capability tools, which crosses into many of the other categories that we're going to talk about. There's data observability. There's giving the ability to assess table access and data usage, and what's actually happening within the data lake. This means we can start to do things like identifying underused data assets and take the necessary steps to resolve that, whether it's doing a little bit of internal marketing to boost its usage, or whether it's switching it off just to save a little bit of money processing that when it isn't being used. There's lake monitoring, so data quality snapshots, custom quality metrics, and support in maintaining regulatory compliance. And this often gives a kind of top-level understanding of the health and reliability of the data within your lake. So giving that warm, fuzzy feeling that things are going okay. And then there's security tools, data security. There's a variety of different security protocols like row-level security, dynamic masking of data, and now many simplified and unified security models. And we even have attribute-based security now if your object tagging is in order. And the correct application of these features all play into building and maintaining trust in a data platform. So we started with engineering and building a platform based on solid principles to create trust. But as we move on to further endeavors with analytics and AI, that trust carries forward. Or to put that another way, getting to the nice clean GenAI outputs is a process which relies on the foundations of the preceding steps. So don't be this person just trying to skip directly to the GenAI without doing anything else. Okay, I'll linger on this side for a moment because there's a QR code if you want to scan that. But earlier this year, I wrote a white paper all about the features of Unity Catalog and the things to consider before migrating, and a starting point for catalog migration if you are starting to embark on that journey. And with Christmas just around the corner, maybe you could delight your nearest and dearest data governance practitioner with a printed copy of that white paper. But right now, we are also offering a free 60-minute assessment to help existing Databricks customers kick off their migration journey to Unity Catalog. Every UC migration is different because of the features which may be already being used outside of the context of Unity, the code being used to read and write data, the number of workspaces, and there's many other factors. So this assessment intends to identify where on the complexity scale your implementation would sit to enable us to better understand the readiness to migrate, as well as the effort that would be required to migrate. And with that, I'll wrap things up. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions openly here, or I've provided a couple of ways that you can get in touch with me on the screen there. So if you'd rather reach out to me via LinkedIn or email, you can do so via those on the screen. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much, Zach. I trust you had a good talk.
It was lovely, thank you.
Oh, perfect. So anybody who's been watching, if you've got any questions for Zach around how we do go about building out trust in your data platform, or some of the finer points that kind of Zach mentioned, drop them in your chat on YouTube, on LinkedIn, online, and we'd love to kind of walk you through. So have we got any questions to kick us off? We should have one. Okay, Zach. So what would the role of DevOps engineers, what would the role of DevOps engineers with this ongoing shift in technology? So I think that's more focused potentially around Simon's original talk, but interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely apply a kind of trust lens to that as well. I mean, DevOps engineers it's a critical role in building trust, because infrastructure as code, for example, and wrapping that in processes to validate, the whole kind of PR process that infrastructure changes then go through, means that infrastructure is more robust. Everything underneath it that underpins is therefore more robust. But also all of the automated testing that platforms go through with deploying things into different environments as well. More broadly, outside of the realms of just trust and the DevOps engineer, is that the DevOps engineer role isn't going away anytime soon. Just because we have SaaS applications now, that doesn't mean that there aren't still mechanisms required to deploy into those SaaS applications. For example, notebooks and code, we still need to deploy and publish that stuff in, and we need to do that in a repeatable, robust, testable way. So I don't personally see that role going anywhere anytime soon.
It's a good question. I guess there's a lot of implications as well when it comes to DevOps in terms of disaster recovery and what that means for building out trust in the platform.
Absolutely, yeah. Disaster recovery, another big one. Having the faith that you're going to be able to fail over to another zone and maintain operation in what is essentially a crisis. So being able to test those processes, fail back from those processes, all really important stuff.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got another question here. How do you see the possibility of replacing the dashboard or reporting platform with GenAI?
Okay, yeah. I mean, again, probably one that's more tightly linked to Simon's section. But my opinion is that we're going to continue to see both. I don't think there is going to necessarily be a replacing of the dashboard. I think that there's still people who very much like to interact with the dashboard and kind of take from that dashboard and interpret that dashboard in their own way. But GenAI will essentially supplement any dashboard usage.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's not going anywhere, complementing different ways in which people consume data. Okay, we've got another question here. So Fabric with Copilot and GenBI with most services going serverless, what should enterprises expect in terms of growing cloud costs? And what would we do to govern these areas? I guess trust is also kind of implicated in cost, right? It's one of those areas that we need to ensure that we're managing as closely as we possibly can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of down to the vendors, down to the software providers to provide us with mechanisms that we can use to measure and control cost, right? Or some kind of third party tool that we would have to integrate into those solutions to be able to measure and attribute cost as well in the right way. So we run the London Databricks user group, and just last week we had an amazing session, all based around cost attribution within Databricks at every level, so you can measure it in different ways. And I've never seen so many questions after a session. They just kept rolling. It was definitely a hot topic.
Yeah, definitely try and check that out. Also, if you have a look at the Advancing Analytics website, Grace on our team just posted a really interesting blog about cost management across Databricks as well, really complementing everything that Zach's talking about there. We've got time for a couple more questions. So, question here from Simon. With reference to Wrangle Master Data Management, how do you see that working? Is it a process or an area dedicated in MDM solution?
Yeah, good question. Depends on the severity, I guess, of the MDM problem. If it's like in my slides, if it is an example of maybe you just need some simple lookups, it could be as simple as just providing a CSV to a location, keeping that up to date, and the engineers can ingest that and process it, look up the relevant values. If it is more widespread than that, in the example of Cincinnati, for example, where it was duplicated and spelled lots of different ways, that one becomes more about kind of the golden source and survivorship and what should we keep as we move through the platform. So that would be on the other end of the scale, where you probably need a more sophisticated and dedicated MDM solution.
Yeah, hopefully generative AI will solve all of MDM for everyone next year, right?
Next year, well, maybe.
I'm sure Gavin's going to talk all of MDM. GenAI, MDM. We got a time for another question? Okay, we got a question here from Ian. Can I use Unity if I'm not using Databricks?
Great question. Yes, you can now. So Databricks actually open sourced Unity catalog earlier this year. It is slightly different. It isn't as feature rich as the Databricks implementation of Unity catalog, but there is an open source version that you can start to integrate other tooling with. So you can use Unity, but it's not as feature rich as the Databricks version.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, Zach, thank you very much for a really interesting topic. Thank you very much for coming, Zach. So next, we'll be transitioning slightly away from data products, slightly away from data platforms and trust, more to start looking at generative AI and a lot of the trends that we're seeing and emerging in this space. So thank you very much. I'm now joined by the wonderful Gavi.
Hey, Terry, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good.
Oh, amazing. Gavi, quick question for you before we get going. Is trust important for AI?
Absolutely, right? Rubbish in, rubbish out, Terry.
That's very true. Very true. Rubbish in, rubbish out. I'm glad that you went for the more polite term than probably what I might have used. So thanks very much for joining us, Gavi. So for anyone who's not met Gavi before, this is Gavi. Gavi is our head of AI. Gavi's really responsible for driving AI excellence, not only across our customers, but actually across everything that Gavi's involved with, be that supporting our partners with the direction of their platforms or championing AI across conferences as well as across YouTube. So if you're interested in this format kind of session, I do recommend you check out our YouTube channel. There's about 400 videos covering data platform, covering Databricks, Fabric, covering generative AI, and a whole host of different topics. So just to wrap it off, Gavi is a Microsoft MVP for artificial intelligence, as well as a Databricks MVP. So both Simon and Gavi are the only Databricks MVPs in the UK, and so are incredibly knowledgeable about both of those platforms. So Gavi, so thank you very much for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
All right. Thank you, Terry. Thank you very much. Right. I'm going to jump straight into my slides because I've got a jam-packed session for everybody. Terry's done a great job in introducing me, but if you want to get in touch with me, my contact details are on the screen. And I'm going to just jump into 5 months ago, just 5 months ago, I stood up in front of a really lovely crowd in London where we were presenting our AI advancing innovation in person. And I spoke about how generative AI is changing the future of work, right? And I quoted all these facts where 91% of organizations are experimenting or investing in Gen AI. And then you've got 75% of CEOs that are willing to dabble with Gen AI and have said that Gen AI certainly has a competitive edge. Also, 40% increase in terms of productivity with employees who use Gen AI. Now, 5 months ago, things have moved on pretty rapidly, right? Where are we now? I mean, if you look at the stats here that's provided on the screen, you see almost double AI private investments into Gen AI. And almost 50% of organizations have adopted AI in at least one business area. That's phenomenal, right? And also, I love this last one. 70% of employees are ready to embrace AI. Now, if you think back about 12 months ago, that numbers were way, way down. Now it's up to 70%. So really, really incredible. But we're not here to talk about all the good things about Gen AI and how they bring value to us, right? What we're here is to show you how we as a company, Advancing Analytics, have brought AI to life. And I'm going to demonstrate just 3 Gen AI use cases here, 3 Gen AI in action. So the first one, without naming the company names, because we're under NDA, we did a fantastic project with Cargo Insurances. Here, we leverage Azure OpenAI to collect all the documents in various places. And where we enabled all the claim handlers to answer questions really efficiently. Now, this was a really interesting project because this is a kind of problem we see in most organizations where they have data stored in emails, in PDFs, in images, all over the place. Bringing them together is a huge challenge, or you're reliant on very selective people that have the knowledge to understand where to go and find that problem and then respond to their customers. Now, you can rely on those people, but they take ages. It doesn't happen in a timely fashion. Now, using Gen AI, using Azure OpenAI, we managed to make a huge impact. We reduced the response time for all claim handlers up to 50%, and this in turn, right, increased productivity significantly. Now, that's one use case that I wanted to demonstrate. I'm really proud of the team. The second use case is to do with an online IELTS edtech company. This is one of my favorites as well. And having children myself, embarking on this project where we use Gen AI to provide loads and loads of students with personalized feedback in a timely fashion was really important to me, right? And what we saw was the consistent feedback that was provided by Gen AI. In fact, what we had from this project was 100% ROI improvement, where this company saw their productivity and profits increase by 100% just by implementing Gen AI to provide personalized feedback. And the last one is something really, really cool that I'll also touch on later on in my slide, where we helped a manufacturing software company to leverage, again, OpenAI to enable all the shop floor customer handlers or people that work on the shop floors to understand what's happening with factories, understand what the problems that they're going to be facing, or even understand how to fix problems. Now, before we implemented this solution, it took them hours, up to a minimum of 2 hours, right down to 6 hours, right? And now we have increased that response time by 720 times. Now, this in turn has, this has actually, in terms of impact, it has, it's on the slides, up to $3 million in terms of savings for the customers. So huge benefits in terms of how GenAI is actually affecting real world customers and how we've implemented it in real world problems. All right, so we've kind of showcased, how we've implemented GenAI, and we've showcased 3 fantastic use cases. But now we're going to look into trends. What's it going to be like in going into 2025? And if you watch Sai's keynote before, he's already touched on quite a few of this already. The first one is agentic framework or agent frameworks, where we use agents or LLM for task delegation and orchestration. This is a really cool one. The next one is multimodal GenAI, and that's almost a natural transition from using RAG, where you're grounding textual data, to now expanding that to text, images, and audio for richer and more contextually aware applications. That's another cool trend that we are already seeing happening now, which will only grow in 2025. And the last one, and perhaps the most important one, is the LLM Ops, how we build scalable and robust infrastructure for really deploying large language models into production. So let's go into agent framework. And this is hot off the press. I put some kind of news articles, and these were probably a day old, right? Everybody's talking about agentic framework. And you'll see all the big vendors, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, everybody that software companies are all talking about implementing agentic frameworks. And I wanted to just showcase what's agent framework? Well, how is it so different to an LLM? And again, Sai already touched on it very briefly before, but I'm going to go through this and explain to this in terms of using an example. So I'm going to talk about how we would incorporate agents in terms of marketing, right? Creating content. So let's start with a traditional LLM, where we all know we go on to ChatGPT, or we use Azure OpenAI, and we say, look, write me an email for a shoe promotion. And GPTs, LLMs are very good at generating content. Now you can play around with it if it doesn't seem very right, and you can go back and you can change the prompt so you get exactly what you want at the end of it. Now moving on from that, we've got the RAG framework, right? Now RAG framework adds a bit more kind of nuance into using LLMs to generate marketing content. Here, what we are doing is we're grounding contextual data so that it's more personalized. You're generating personalized marketing campaigns. So as an example here, we can say, write a promotional email about running shoes for Simon. Now in the database, it's got all the history about what Simon has bought. It will grab that historical data and then generate very personalized content based on that contextual data. So it's brilliant. But moving on to agents, not only would they be able to generate personalized content, but they can also take it a step further. They can automatically schedule an email. They can analyze open rates, for example, and based on the rates, they can modify the campaign based on performance. And this is done all autonomously, and it's brilliant. So in summary, agents act autonomously, integrating reasoning and tools without manual intervention. Now, this is all very cool, very theoretical, but here I really wanted to showcase what our team here at Advancing Analytics are already starting to do with agents, right? So I've got a video to play here, and give me a second. I'll just play that video for you. Advancing HQ.
Hey, I'd like to get a new quote for an existing plan I have. Can you help me with that?
Welcome to Secure Life Insurance. I'd be happy to assist you with getting a new quote for your existing plan. To provide you with an accurate quote, could you please share some additional
Sorry, I don't have an existing plan. I need a brand new quote. Can you help me with that?
Of course, I'd be glad to help you with a new quote. To get started, I'll need some information from you. Could you please provide your age, gender?
Yeah, certainly. My age is 28. I'm a male. My BMI is 25. I have 2 children. I don't smoke, and I live in the Southwest.
Based on the information you provided, the estimated insurance claim amount for a new plan would be approximately $5,995.47. Please note that this is just...
Wow, that's a tad expensive. Do you have any other information that you can tell me about the services you offer as a provider?
Certainly. At Secure Life Insurance, we offer a variety of services to meet your insurance needs. Here's an overview of what we provide. 1. Life insurance plans. We offer term life, whole life, and universal life insurance policies. These can be tailored to provide financial security for your loved ones in case of your passing.
Ah, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to end the call now.
Right, so what you saw there was Chris from Advancing Analytics, right, implementing this whole orchestration here that you see. So it's based on an agent framework, and it's pretty complicated. What I love about that video is Chris is very impatient, just like me. He interrupts the agent. The agent is very patient, responds to Chris really well. The agent also understands accents and slangs really, really well. And I love that part of the video, right? But behind that video is pretty complex agent framework that we've implemented at Advancing Analytics. So what you can see on the screen, we use a multiple agents. And what the cool thing it does, it actually also talks to Databricks, where we are hosting machine learning models to do that prediction and regression based on the information that Chris provided. So this is really, really cool stuff. And I can see how it automates a lot of the workflow in a lot of verticals, especially in insurance verticals. Right. So moving on to the next kind of big trend in terms of GenAI is multimodal GenAI. Again, this is also starting to gain traction. If you use ChatGPT, you probably already realized that you can enable voice mode and you can convert audio to text really, really efficiently, right? And here, what we've also done is implemented that for one of our customers. So this workflow here, what it does is anybody with any languages can ask a question, and it will translate that particular language into English. And then that whole workflow downstream is orchestrated by multiple agents. So here, what we're doing is we're connecting to Databricks, and then we have an orchestrator deciding whether we do text to SQL, or we also do a RAG kind of framework where we are embedding documents to provide more richness and contextual response back to the user. So these are all stuff that we are already starting to do here at Advancing Analytics, and it's really, really cool. So you might say, oh my God, that looks amazing, right? But what are the benefits? Why should I be implementing this? What benefits does it have for the organization that I work with? And there's loads, but really what I want to touch on is just 3 benefits that you see on the screen. Agent frameworks have a huge potential to enhance customer experience. Speed up decision making. So what you saw there in the workflows, how it talks to Databricks, pulls down the regression model, gets the analysis and gets a prediction, augments other documents, and then provides the response. It speeds up decision making. And what it also does is allows organizations to scale effortlessly. So when you have demands, when you have peaks at demands at peak period, using an agent framework like what we've shown will allow you to scale really well. Okay, and the last one, and probably one of my most favorite one to talk about, is LLM Ops, right? Where we build scalable and robust infrastructure to make sure all the GenAI applications that we are developing at pilot succeed at production. And it's not easy, right? Even Ali Ghodsi back in the Data and AI Summit said 85% of GenAI projects have not made it to production. Now, if you go back about 5 years ago, this is the same trends that we saw with MLOps, machine learning and MLOps, where if you don't have the right frameworks, your machine learning model are not going to scale efficiently and successfully in production. And the reason being, right, it's not all bed of roses. There's huge challenges when it comes to GenAI implementation. And you're probably asking the question, why? Now, GenAI infrastructure is new. Nobody really understands or knows the best way to implement it. A lot of people are playing around with GenAI, but having to productionizing GenAI application is a totally different beast. But here at Advancing Analytics, we've productionized 2 use cases, and we've gained some huge insights into what works and what doesn't work. And I've kind of itemized that into 5 points here, right? We've got scaling issues where you get performance dips during demand surges. How would you deal with that? You've got budget ambiguity where you've got many business units all leveraging a single OpenAI, for example, LLM model. How do you make sure who's using what? How do you understand the cost allocation? Security concerns is a huge, huge topic. And you've got operational blind spots, right? You don't understand how people are actually using large language model. And because of all of this, people spend a lot of time in the POCs or pilots, creating that infrastructure whereby they fail or it doesn't go very far beyond that pilot stage. So what we've done here is we've played around with it, we've understood, we've taken the learnings, and for example here, scaling issues, right? This is a huge one that we have faced from productionizing a couple of GenAI use cases. How do we deal with performance dips during demand surges? This is one option that we have at Advancing Analytics, and it's a pretty cool option. It allows you to distribute load. So for example, if you've got an OpenAI, an Azure OpenAI deployed in a particular region, and it's very slow, it spreads that load very effectively. What I like about it as well, you can do your blue-green deployment. So for example, if you're wanting to test one of your workflows, you can swap quite easily about it, between it. The adaptive throttling is something very, very recent that we've adopted here at Advancing Analytics, where it allows you, for example, to throttle between PTU, which is your provision throughput units, and TPN to get optimal performance. And all this by applying all the Azure APIM or API management, what it actually does, it supports any number of service endpoints to make sure that you've got the maximum amount of flexibility. The other thing that we've done here at Advancing Analytics is to understand how we mitigate unclear cost allocation for AI usage. So for here, for example, we've implemented solutions so we understand the tokens, understand which business units are using tokens, and we can also provision policies to make sure that's limited so it manages usage and prevents spikes. We also can do real-time monitoring. And also we can do proactive blocking where we can estimate the token usage for prompts and then block the requests exceeding the limit before reaching the backend. And the last thing I want to talk about is operational blind spot, which is a big, big one for us here, right? And what we have done here is we've implemented this solution so we can have comprehensive logging. We can also track request response and resource usage through predefined tools and templates, and we get a holistic view of the entire usage of the entire infrastructure. So putting all this together, we've created a Generate infrastructure will allow companies and our customers to take GenAI projects or applications done in pilot right through production. And this is really cool because what it does is it's got a huge amount of flexibility in terms of not only limiting to Azure OpenAI, we can use Databricks, for example, to develop large language model applications to GenAI applications. We can use open source models as well, and everything is monitored and logged as well. So there are 3 reasons why we came up with Generate. And the 3 reasons are we wanted to help companies accelerate the experimentation of advanced GenAI use cases. We wanted to make sure all our AI services have got ultimate control and governance over the consumption. And also we wanted to make sure that all GenAI applications that's done in the pilot stage can be deployed really quickly and efficiently through to production. Right, and I'm going to finish up with one of our kind of how to succeed with AI. Based on all our learnings with our customers, we've got a 5-step GenAI strategy here. So if you're thinking about starting to implement GenAI, then start with defining your vision, right? Set objectives and use case. prepare the foundation, we spoke about infrastructure and how at Advancing Analytics, we've got Generate as an infrastructure to help businesses scale the GenAI application. The next thing to do is to prototype and validate. So build and validate your GenAI models, implement AI governance and monitor AI implementation, and with that, expand and operationalize AI across business. Now, as Terry said, we've got loads of resources talking about, machine learning, GenAI, LLM ops, and machine learning. I've put a barcode there to a lot of blogs that we write, so please feel free to have a read. And we've got lots of YouTube videos as well talking about, GenAI and machine learning. And with that, I'm gonna leave this slide on for a couple of seconds, where we've got 2 white papers that talk about the AI revolution in insurance and retail, and it gives you insight into how people are already starting to incorporate GenAI within retail and insurance, and all the kind of challenges that you need to be aware of in terms of implementing GenAI.
Blown away, Gavi! Blimey! I mean, chock full of content. My Advancing Analytics branded socks have been blown off. Amazing stuff. I mean, Simon's trends are cool. Trusting your data platform is cool. That stuff is freaking cool. There's so many interesting things that you covered. Also, I mean, in the chats, like, round of applause for Gavi and the most animated slides I've ever seen.
Well,
I'm also going to give you £1, and hopefully you give me £3.50 back, right?
Exactly. For every pound that you invest in GenAI, well done for paying attention, Terry. You get $3.50 back.
Okay, I've got no idea about conversion rates, but I'm going to assume it's still good. Amazing, right? I mean, there is so much stuff that we could kind of get into. So I guess first of all, there is a huge breadth in terms of what you need to look at. And I kind of roll back and reflect on what it was to be a data scientist 5 years ago, where you almost had, 2 camps of the kind of ML engineer and a pure data scientist building models. But when I look at the breadth of what you've covered, it's staggering in terms of what you need to consider when building out an AI platform. What does a team really look like now? Do we expect that to be one person? Is that multiple people now? How does that kind of work?
That's a really good question, right? I think the way GenAI is moving and the way it's evolving, we almost need to adopt a lot of data engineering practices as well, right? So going back to your initial question to me, do you need trust in AI? Absolutely. You need trust. That initial bit, making sure your data is trusted, so whatever is fed into your GenAI model is not going to be producing rubbish. That's important. Second part of it is integrating into your infrastructure, and that takes a whole lot of engineering skills, right? And different skills as well. So what you saw in my slides before, APIM, that's all new to data scientists and AI engineers. We are having to learn that and incorporate that to make sure that all the GenAI applications that we build are successful, because you have to load balance all your requests. And it's a lot of different skills that are coming together. And it makes sense. If you look at Microsoft, for example, they're starting to integrate a lot of data science and engineering, AI applications, right? So those are coming together a lot more than 5 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, again, some really interesting points in there. I kind of want to focus a little bit around the amazing demo that you showed that Chris had put together, kind of conversing with an insurance bot, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, you touched a lot on kind of agents. I wondered if you could explain a little bit about what is an agent and kind of what an agent does compared to say a typical sample API call? Like where is an agent involved, and where do you end up using something, just an API or something similar?
So, and we can still use an API with an agent framework, right? But an agent has an ability to do very focused things, for example. So going back to Chris's brilliant demo there, we had up to 3 agents. So we had 1 agent, for example, just talking to Databricks, where we are hosting machine learning models and constantly looping around, making sure that the model it's pulling down from Databricks is the right model, making sure that information that Chris fed in about his demographics are right, making sure all of those things are linked together. It's done by that particular agent. So it's got memory, it's got specific tools to actually understand what that forecast or prediction should be based on the information that's provided. Now we've got another agent that is looking at all Chris's previous historical information and making sure that, okay, based on his previous data, his historical information, this is what it's going to be like, right? And getting all that back together, it's an agent framework. By the end of it, can all be called via an API.
I am a little bit worried for Chris, though. When the AI robots rise, they're going to remember that Chris is interrupting them, and he's going to be first to go. I'm just saying.
I loved it. I loved it. I loved it.
All right, Gavi, I mean, you're immersed, right, in the world of AI all day, every day. I'm really interested to know, what are you most excited about at the moment?
Honestly, I am really excited about the agent framework. I think it's got a lot of potential to revolutionize what we do now, and a lot of industries as well, to automate things without taking the human in the loop out. But I think in terms of accelerating productivity here, immense value. So I'm really excited about that.
Amazing. All right. Another question that I have for you. There's been a lot of talk this year, particularly when was it, the kind of beginning of the summer, about how do people really realize the value from an investment. So you said, $1 spent, $3.50 back in return. And we had a day this year where, a lot of AI related shares kind of tanked because people were talking a lot about, we're not realizing the value necessarily in our AI investments. Now, looking at the use cases that you talked through, there's a huge impact baked into all of those. So how should anybody kind of watching today think about how they can go about really recognizing and realizing that value from their investment?
That's a very good question. So that's based on our 5-step GenAI strategy, right? Start small, start with a pilot, make sure you've got the infrastructure in place to allow you to scale, which will then immediately allow you to realize the value. It's the same as 5 years ago, Terry, where everyone was dabbling into machine learning models, right? But not having that platform to enable that being able to productionize machine learning models. It's the exact same thing that's happening with GenAI models.
Amazing. Are there any last remarks or anything that you want to leave with anybody? Any call to actions? I know you said go and download those 2 flyers, 2 white papers.
Absolutely. And also, if you're looking into incorporating GenAI, we've had loads and loads of experience doing that with many customers. So come and speak to us, come and talk to us in terms of challenges we face, see how we can help you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Amazing. Amazing topic. Thank you very much, Gavi.
Thank you for
see you
having
later.
me.
Okay. Right. So up next, we are again shifting away from generative AI, moving now to really thinking about how you can, again, realize the investment not only of your generative AI, but now really thinking about how you realize the value of your data investments in general. So I mentioned at the very start that data products are a really interesting term, and they kind of have factored in a lot into the sessions that Simon has done about predictions around trends for where the market is kind of shifting. And it's one of these topics that roll back 18 months and nobody was really talking about. But now it is pretty commonplace in every discussion that we have in terms of how do you think about very discrete units of deployment and discrete units of value for your data. And so I'm really fortunate to be joined today by East. Hi,
Hello, Terry.
East. How you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm not bad, thanks. I'm not bad. I can't complain. And so, East, thank you very much for joining us today. So East is our head of analytics and our general analytics guru on absolutely everything. I mean, the man models. I mean, data models.
Data models,
But you
yeah,
get
not that
my idea, right? And so East, as mentioned, is our head of analytics and is responsible ultimately for, again, driving the success of a lot of our analytical projects. And analytics covers a huge spectrum, right? From not only how we take data from your platform and visualize it and present that back. So we talked a lot about the shift from kind of traditional dashboards into generative BI. But as well as that kind of front-end analytics, analytics covers a huge spectrum in terms of how we actually shape data to offer you value. And these are, I guess, a lot of the kind of topics that, East will talk about. So, East, I'll hand over to you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Terry. Okay. So, having a solid data strategy is important, but harnessing data products and the value that they bring can massively improve your overall organizational strategy. What we'll see over the next 20 minutes is setting the scene, walking through an anonymized case study based on the work we did with a large online fashion retailer, so we can see the design and implementation of data products in action. So to set the scene, most companies have a pretty big ambition of being data-driven, but the reality is that most struggle with these types of projects, and very few organizations actually end up being data-driven. As leaders, we want to continually push our organizations up the maturity curve, but often we fall at that first hurdle. By getting the left of the curve correct, it makes implementing and harnessing the right of the curve much easier. So this large online fashion retailer is fairly mature on the maturity curve, already has plenty of insights in its core operations, and the left of the curve was, on the whole, fairly well understood, and that they were moving into the right part of the curve. As part of their maturity journey, they wanted to implement a federated version of Hydrate, our data engineering solution, which you've probably heard about quite a lot already today. Through federation, this would allow different business units and departments to be more responsible for their data, have more ownership, particularly around the processing of data. As part of the implementation of a federated platform, there was a requirement to show value of the platform back to the business, particularly in an area that had previously been underserved by data. So let's bring in data products. So succinctly put, data products are curated, trusted data insights for a specific business area. So that ultimately you get enhanced decision-making, improved data accessibility, as well as a consistent user experience. In more detail, we're treating data as a product. We're making sure that there's ownership and accountability for the data, so that ultimately value is maximized as early as possible, so that when the usefulness of the product is gone, the product can be retired and that no one is left with assets that are unmaintained and unused. So applying good product thinking to all of this. So what makes a great analytical data products? Unsurprisingly, they have great characteristics that make them products, in the sense that they are valuable. They provide value to an organization. What value might look like to each organization could be different. They are usable in that people want to use them. They also know how to use them. It's intuitive to use, or at least there's the documentation and training embedded or close to that product. They're feasible with the skills and data available, and they're also viable within the budgetary, legal, ethical, and reputational constraints that exist within an organization, as well as the wider regulatory frameworks that might be imposed from above. So in order to design and build great data products for ourselves and our customers, we've developed a design framework for data products, as well as the supporting data models called Sunbeam. We called it Sunbeam because it illuminates the path from strategy to implementation, bringing clarity to data product design, just as a sunbeam brings light to a lake. And that might sound cheesy, and it is pretty cheesy, but ultimately it also allows us to discover where analytics implementations can bring the most value and to bring that value quickly. It is ultimately a collaborative and iterative approach and aims to avoid common pitfalls where the end results may be technically sound, but it doesn't quite meet the business needs. It bridges the gaps between business and technology and ensures that business stakeholders can answer their critical questions and will also use the new solution. Our 5-step guides of starting with why, domain identification, value distillation, data product design, and user questions helps guide everyone along on the journey to successful data product design and implementation. While this approach here with the 5 steps is good for identifying an unidentified use case and data product, it's not the only pathway we have for defining and designing data products. So, starting with why. Simon Sinek, in his book Start With Why, encourages the understanding of the purpose first. So why does it need to exist in the first place? And for data products, it's that teams can better align technical decisions with business goals. So for example, rather than starting with we need a dashboard, the what, or we'll use Databricks and Power BI, the how, beginning with, well, we need to help the logistics team identify bottlenecks in the supply chain, the why, can lead to more focused and effective solutions. This approach helps avoid those common pitfalls, like building something that is technically impressive, but is ultimately not going to be used, or creating visualizations that don't really address business problems. With this customer, we took the time to understand their strategy, to understand the why, asking questions such as, well, what's the strategic focus? What are the key initiatives this year? Is there an objective to develop or grow or improve some aspect of your business? This brought our attention to supply chain and lead time optimization in particular. So we have our focus area, but where does supply chain fit in the organization? And what does supply chain encompass? Who should we be talking to for our use case? Luckily, our customer had already mapped out their organization with domains or departments, along with the various processes conducted by each area. Having an organization mapped out in this way allows us to look at the wider organizational landscape to see if there are any overlapping or complementary areas. In this example, sourcing and procurement, which contains supplier management and supplier performance processes, could be a potential candidate for ideation and development. But with the strategy being very clear from the outset that it was a supply chain issue, it helped us to focus quickly. So once we've identified the domains, we can work down through this value process, distilling our value until we're able to get to an MVP where we're able to deliver actual value quickly. So for the priority domain, supply chain, we identified all the business processes that the domain is responsible for. We then wanted to identify one process with the greatest strategic influence, and that led us to logistics. And within logistics, we wanted to then identify all the events that take place to deliver that process from end to end. So we collaborated with our SMEs in the business to map out the logistics process in a series of events using basic grammar in the form of who does what, so indicating that there should be an actor and an action. And we mapped out this as a timeline to understand the sequence of events and any dependencies. So in this example, we've got our actor and action being things like supplier books carrier. Carrier collects from factory, carrier stuffs container, container delivered to port, etc., etc. We're then able to prioritize the events in order of importance and value rather than in the order in which they happened. So this meant that for lead time optimization, the most important and valuable events in the process were supplier books carrier, company raises ASN, and supplier hands over product. And as these were bottlenecks in the process that the customer has control over, but could hold their suppliers to account and to encourage those suppliers to work with higher performing carriers. When it comes to the actual design of the supporting data model, Sunbeam itself is agile. It's pretty lightweight, and we're asking questions of the business in language which makes it relevant to them. So we're not layering it with technicalities. We're not getting hung up on things like facts and dimensions. We're talking language in which makes sense to everyone in the room. It also creates alignment of concepts and definitions. So things like, what is a customer? What is a supplier? What is a carrier? Some people might have different interpretations of what those things mean. And by having those open conversations allows for those definitions to be agreed, as well as any divergence to be documented as well. Also helps create a shared understanding of value between technical teams and business teams. It also shifts the ownership of data from historically from our data teams, our technical teams, over to our business teams. So that it's always not falling upon technical teams to maintain as the default. And through good collaboration, we also end up getting a well-designed data model for our data product as well. So we conceptually modeled these priority events. We got our SMEs to describe the events in more detail using very simple questions that are very quickly designing the conceptual design of the product without getting hung up on technical details like what is a fact, what is a dimension, but we're still designing these technical details in a quick and collaborative approach. The questions we are asking followed on from our who does what, such as how many things are you interested in order to get an idea of key metrics and KPIs. When did the event happen? To understand how dates and times are relevant and important for analysis. Where did it happen? So that we kind of know in the world where the event takes place and which areas we might need to pay more attention to. Why did it happen? So that we can understand the reason for the event. In this example, it was because the company issued a purchase order to suppliers that triggered the event. How did it happen? So we get an idea of how goods and services are being supplied. As a way of validating the conceptual model, we asked our SMEs to identify what questions they like the data product and the data model to help with the overall objective of lead time optimization. The questions were used to validate whether we had the relevant metrics and attributes to be able to answer them. And if we weren't able to answer them, were we able to add in these new metrics and new attributes, or did we need something else entirely? But those user questions also had a secondary purpose as well. We were able to map these questions to our delivery objects. So from a technical perspective, our facts and dimensions, and asked our SMEs to rank the questions in order of importance and value. This then helped us to prioritize what we needed to deliver as part of the MVP. So that from the back of that first iteration, our SMEs are being rewarded quickly with the value that they've been helping to design. This produced a report that looked very similar to the one here. There was a lot of other magic that happened behind the scenes. But ultimately, the customer loved this approach and have since adopted this way of working with other areas of their business. So being able to identify value quickly and also being able to produce value quickly as well. But data products aren't just about reporting. They're about providing value to users in a way in which they want to use and access data. So we're going to stop for a bit and have a little demo. We're going to look at how we might interact with a data product in action. So flipping over to Databricks, we have our dimensional model as in our curated layer. So in the middle, we have our visual representation of it. So for those of you who are familiar with star schemas and Kimball methodology, you'll notice that we have our fact table in the middle, and around the outside, we have our dimensions. For those of you who don't know, these are all the things like the metrics, the how manys we're interested in, and around the outsides, these are the things we want to slice and dice those metrics and KPIs by. So we could implement a well-curated data asset within Databricks. We can then expose that well-curated, well-designed data to Power BI through a semantic model. That semantic model, most people are going to interact with through a report. Reports that we've seen within Power BI, within the presentation. It is ultimately interactive, so we can have a look at individual suppliers to know how they are impacting their KPIs as well as the carriers associated with them, and vice versa. So we can have a look at carriers and how they're impacting individual suppliers. We've also got, in this example, some of our business questions, our user questions that were targeted by some of those users. So, for example, within our carrier confirmations, we have the question: what is the impact of confirming outside of KPI? So, what was the impact of our carriers missing their targets? So, we have 11.5 million booked cartons or 466 million booked units. Reports are great for a lot of people, but they're not great for everyone. Some people like to be able to explore the data in a more exploratory purpose, which you can flip over to Databricks again. So here we have a Genie room. So Genie is Databricks' GenAI Copilot, which uses the underlying data. So that the same data that we saw in the diagram, the same data that's supplying the report, is the same data that is being used by Genie. So we can ask it a question. What is the impact of confirming? At this point, it doesn't have the same context that Power BI does. So it provides a very high level, top level answer. I want more detail. I want to know what is the impact on booked units and booked cartons. It provides me that detail. The numbers still aren't right. I need to focus in on a specific year. It provides me with that specific year. But if I look at the data, like the code it's generated to retrieve that data, I notice that it's not using the right date that I want. So I can give it an instruction to tell it, actually, you need to be using this. And it now returns me the right data. But again, not everyone wants to interact with data in the same way. So people might not want to use reports, people might not want to use SQL or interact with something which generates SQL. Some people like to use Excel. So I can connect to the same semantic model that is being fed by Databricks, fed by the curated layer that's feeding the report. I can connect to that within Excel, and I can filter into my year, I can filter into my specific KPI target, and I can get the same number. So regardless of your experience, a well-designed, well-curated data product provides you with the same answer, regardless of how you want to access the data. So thank you very much for listening. If you want to connect and ask more questions about data products, or if you want to experience Sunbeam firsthand, then please get in touch.
Wow, I'll take it back. GenAI, yeah, it's kind of cool. But did you see that entity relationship diagram?
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's really bringing out the cool stuff today. Amazing. Thanks very much for going through that. Really interesting to kind of see, I guess, not only how data products are driving value, but really, how they're driving, value with an example kind of customer as well. So great stuff. I have a load of questions.
Hit me.
A load of questions, so much so I've had to write them all down. All right, okay. So now, I guess when it comes to thinking about a data model, I mean, how important are requirements up front to building a data model? Why shouldn't I just, dive straight in?
Yeah, so you always need some form of requirement up front in order to get building. You don't necessarily need to know everything, but you need to know something. And as someone who might have a lot of technical expertise, you know the data intimately well, but you don't necessarily know the business all that well either. So being able to go and get those requirements allows that alignment between business and data teams, so that what you're actually delivering is of value to the business. It's able to answer their questions. And when it comes to agreeing concepts, that everyone's just talking the same language. In experience, people don't understand what facts and dimensions are, but they do know what metrics are, KPIs are. They also know what they want to slice and dice that data by.
Yeah, excellent. So kind of talking in their language and bringing it back down to the domain and maybe not the tech. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Sounds good to me. All right. I follow lots of data influencers on the internet. Simon Whiteley for one of them. And a lot of them talk about, a lot of these different kind of modeling standards and techniques. And one that seems to be emerging in conversation a lot is this idea of one big table, right? OBT.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts around that? And is that, something that you would recommend as a modeling practice?
So to use the stock cliche, it depends. There is very much an area where if we apply the right modeling practice, how we then implement it is then down to technological choices. So things like One Big Table is great for tools like Tableau, Looker, etc. But when you're dealing with tools like Power BI, One Big Table isn't going to quite work with it. So when we're, again, designing conceptually, we're designing without the tool stack in mind. We're just designing really what the model should look like. And then we're then implementing based upon what the technical requirements are. So it's more of a use what's good for the use case in hand rather than dogmatically always focusing on what you want. As advanced analytics, we're big fans of Kimball and star schemas, but it's not always appropriate.
Do you think so? That's a really important thing, I guess, for people watching is as they're considering not only how they model, but actually what platform is their end destination for analytics, that has bearing on how they should be designing and thinking about the structure of their data models. Is that right?
Yeah. I guess it's data architecture. It's the thinking of it as the whole rather than just the narrow scope.
That's cool. Okay, and so now I love the Genie demo. Really interested in the kind of, I guess, the transition, maybe not the transition, but the kind of augmented approach of having your more traditional analytics and your facts and dimensions, as you kind of describe, being augmented by Gen BI. I guess the question that everyone always asks, right, is how will Gen BI and will this kind of analytics, like generative analytics, ultimately replace the dashboards?
I mean, will it replace the dashboards? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Again, it depends on who your audience is. Some people will just want a canned report because that's how they just want their data. Others will want to be able to explore the data more succinctly without actually having or needing to have the technical skills to get to that data themselves. And something like Genie allows them to interrogate the data without having to go through a dashboard, without having to go through Excel, without having to learn SQL. So it's really powerful. I don't think it's the end of dashboards. I think it's more at an intersection of where analytics and AI come together. It's more about augmenting rather than replacing.
Okay, cool. Is SQL dead? Do I need to bother learning SQL anymore if Genie's just going to write it for me?
Yeah, I'm not going to answer that one. Just rile up the internet by saying, yeah, SQL is dead. No, it's not. SQL's not dead. It's probably one of the oldest programming languages in the world, and Genie still writes SQL. It's good to validate it, but if you don't necessarily need to know it.
Amazing. Any questions from the audience? Okay, so we have a question here. In data product, what could be best practice for handling master data or shared data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we think about like data product, like the data product by itself is valuable. Master data is by itself valuable because we're harmonizing our data from potentially disparate sources into a single record of truth. And that then just becomes a reference point for other products to then use. So it still needs to be treated as a product, it needs to have a life cycle. It needs ownership. So these are, I guess, more like governance questions rather than analytics ones. But it needs to be treated with the same respect that we're treating other sources of data within data products.
Good answer. I'm going to dig in a little bit to your point around ownership. Now, given we're talking about data products, right, and we're thinking about products, great products need great owners. How vital is it to the success and failure of a data product rollout to have the right person in charge of that data product?
Yeah, it's 100% critical. Like if you don't have that ownership, you don't have that vision for what it needs to be providing, it's just going to be falling flat on its face. And we're going to be ending up pretty much where we have been for the last 20, 30 years of we deliver something and because of no ownership, people use it, but then don't quite treat it with respect. They treat it with suspicion. They don't trust it. But by having that ownership, there is that vision to be put forward for things to be improved and for new features to be delivered. So not talking about actually let's deliver everything all at once. Let's do things in an initiative manner. Let's do things properly. Let's deliver the value. And only really a product owner can do that.
How do I find a data product owner? I think for the last 10 years, I've struggled to find data stewards, let alone data product owners. Can I just go on Indeed.com and stick a job advert up and I'll get 1,000 applications? Like where do you find somebody to own a data product?
Yeah, I mean, that is the trend, right? Where you are seeing specialized specific roles, not just for data, but for like platforms as well. And like there are product owners for pretty much everything. But that is really when you got to the point where it's a well-oiled machine rather than when you're starting off. When you're trying to find a product owner, it is finding someone within the business who wants this data, who sees the value in it, has the vision for it. But more importantly, they're aware of all their responsibilities, because it is something which, well, not necessarily having to be a full-time job, will start eating into the time that they can dedicate to the role in which they currently provide. So there's considerations to be made. But I think with the right person, if you find that right person, it will be beneficial to everyone.
Great. I've got two last questions for you, East. Number one is how vital is thinking about data as a product in terms of thinking about commercializing your data? I know it's an ask that we get a lot, which is how do I actually drive value out of this data that we generate as a business? How do we make money out of it? Do you have to have a data product to commercialize your data? Does it make it easier?
So if you want to commercialize data, treating it as a product doesn't make it easier, because it's applying that life cycle. You are thinking about your customer, you're thinking about your audience. So if you want someone to buy something, you need to think about actually what do they want, what do they need, and that can come about by applying like product thinking and applying the principles of data products. You don't necessarily have to commercialize data in order to adopt data products, but it is just an approach.
Oh yeah. All right, my last question for you. So we touched on it a little bit with a data product owner, but I guess we've touched on trust, right? So we've got now a platform that we trust, that's been built right. We've got a platform that has been modeled right, and we know that it's right with what the business want. Hopefully we've got great AI models kind of running as well. But now I've got a business who have never had any of this before and might not be mature enough. Like, how do you think about really landing a big change transformation project like a platform or generative AI? How do you land that with the teams to make sure that they're able to adopt it and really realize the value of your investment?
Yeah, so this is quite a fairly big topic. So a lot of it is going to stem on like data culture. So how do people currently treat data? How do they respect it? How do they use it? How do they interact with it? And you don't have to tackle it all at once, because if you tackle it all at once, it's not going to work. So again, it's the small iterative improvements. So when it comes to the design of data products, we're already engaging business stakeholders. They're already getting excited about what is coming, what's possible. When it comes to initial releases of it, those same initial stakeholders, they're there, they're using it, they're shouting about it, they are your champions. And then as your product matures, it's ready for wider release, then you can start building in things like launch events, launch parties, and there's I guess you talk about marketing your products. You're selling your product not necessarily to the wider world, but your internal organization, and you're providing the materials for users to consume the products and know where it is as well. And through each continual improvement, we're building on that culture, we're getting people to trust it, and we're reaffirming what value actually means to the organization.
Amazing stuff, East. Thank you so much for all of your content today. Really interesting stuff. I mean, shameless plug from me, right? If you're interested in learning more about data products, hit East up, right? You know, we love talking about this stuff. It is an awful lot of fun. Okay, up next, we have our panel to close us out.
All right, ready to go. Terry, do you want to kick this off, or am I?
Yes. Hold on. Am I on? Yeah. Right. Sorry, we're trying a different camera angle so I can introduce our lovely panel. So you've seen from him, you've heard from him. He is Simon Whiteley. Simon will be hosting our panel, joined by our esteemed friends and colleagues. So joining us today, we have Richard. So Richard is a tech specialist focusing on the financial services and insurance market for Microsoft. With Richard, we also have Leaping. Leaping is a senior solution architect at Databricks, also our lovely co-host of the London Databricks meetup. Do check that out. And then we have Gavi, our head of AI. Gavi, who you met earlier. And then last on our panel, we have Jim. Jim is our senior VP of data analytics out in the US. So thank you all for joining us. Over to you, Simon.
All right, cool. Thanks, Terry, for the intro. And hello, lovely panelists. Welcome. Hope everyone's doing well and enjoying things so far. A little bit of housekeeping. So we've had a bunch of questions coming into chat. We've got a bunch of discussion points we'd kind of prepped early because we don't know how many questions you guys are going to throw at us. So we've got our AV elves behind the scenes. We'll be kind of picking out some of your questions, picking out some of our questions, throwing up for a bit of discussion. Then we'll do a bit of a round table and kind of see how it goes. That is our plan. So first, we'll do a bit more of an intro, let people kind of actually just essentially say hello to you guys, introduce themselves, and give us a little bit of background in terms of where they work in terms of data, AI, and kind of what they're excited about currently. So I'm gonna pick on people, kind of go around our group just to kind of do a quick intro. So Richard, why don't you kick it off?
Thanks, Simon, and thanks for inviting me to be here today. So I think myself, I'm a lead technical specialist at Microsoft. I'm focusing predominantly on data and AI. My main focus is always data and analytics and generative AI. Prior to Microsoft, I spent 10 years in banking, running data teams and business intelligence teams, and another decade or so in utilities, doing similar kind of implementations before joining Microsoft. I also did a little stint of consulting for a couple of years before I joined, which really sharpened my senses as to what customers are facing out in the field when they need to implement a new data solution. So yeah, that's my main focus. Banking and capital markets and the insurance sector are where I spend most of my time.
Awesome. Amazing, thank you. So if you've got any questions around current Microsoft direction, strategy, all that kind of stuff, we have our resident expert in here with us. On the other side of the fence, Leaping, do you want to kind of give a quick intro yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Leaping. I'm a senior solution architect at Databricks. I've been with Databricks for 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was on the other side of the fence, working as Richard's co-worker in Microsoft. And then prior to that, I was building things, implementing data platforms and doing in-house consulting on data and AI. So my primary focus is data engineering, data warehousing, BI side of things. These days, I do quite a lot of GenAI projects just because you cannot run away from it. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome, thank you. So any horrible, hairy questions about Databricks, I'm just going to throw them that way rather than asking myself, which sounds good to me. We're going to switch the order slightly, and we're going to go for Jim next. So Jim, as Terry said, recently joined us as Senior VP of Data over in the States. Jim, do you want to kind of say hello and give us a bit of background?
Yeah, great to be here. Jim Shapinsky, SVP Data Product Strategy at Advancing Analytics. About 16 years in retail CPG across the Hershey Company, Procter & Gamble, and worked with Walmart. Backgrounds in data analytics, sales and marketing, Catman, supply chain, you name it, I've done it. About 22 years in tech across product and data engineering, software development. So excited to be here talking all things data and AI.
Amazing. We're excited you're here with us as well. And finally, obviously, last but not least, our very own Dr. Gavi. Do you want to kind of give another intro, even though people already know you from your earlier session?
Yep, I'm Gavi. I of course work in the wonderful Advancing Analytics, head of AI here. Met me before. So yes, thank you for having me on the panel.
Amazing. Cool. Right. So now everyone is familiar with you guys. I'm not going to bother introducing myself. Hello, I'm Simon. We will go and kind of get the first of our questions up. So I'll look at our AVL, so grab one of your questions, and then we can kind of dip into it. Given there might be some audio echoing, what we'll do is we'll pull a question up. If it makes sense for a certain person, I might pick on you. If you want to answer something desperately, give me a wave, and then we'll tee it up and we'll go into it if that sounds good to people. So do we have our first question lined up? Otherwise, I'll dive into our sample questions. Okay, we'll dive into our sample questions. Oh, okay, it's coming up. All right, so along the theme of our trust. So we were talking about trust earlier. We're saying you need a trusted data platform. You need trust for AI. You need trust all over the place. It is one of the themes of this year. How do you ensure the integrity and trustworthiness of a data platform when you're at scale, when you're doing this for over a huge amount? So whether that's as you're a big enterprise selling it in, whether you're a vendor making something and selling it, how do you ensure trust is actually baked in from the get-go? Who wants to kick us off?
I'll go first. Thank you so much. So I think I'll talk a wee bit about my experience in the field and working with customers, what I've seen work. So I think it changes from customer to customer, right? But I think the most important thing, and this might get a wee bit contentious because I will mention mesh, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that you must adopt a mesh, but I think one of the patterns that I see successfully to ensure that trustworthiness is where you have some kind of hybrid mesh. You have to have some kind of central capability that ingests information in a trusted, secure, consistent manner with all the good data quality and master data management and governance and controls. But at the same time, you have to allow for the innovation within a business. You must allow those people who are closest to the data, those subject matter experts, to take those trusted data foundations and turn them into a data product which drives value. So I think there's always going to be a bit of a blend. I see that pattern working the best with the customers that adopt it. And I think anyone who goes kind of the monolithic approach initially will always drift towards that kind of hybrid mesh. And similarly, I think I've had 2 customers attempt to go with a full mesh implementation and always had to come back to drive to some kind of hybrid, because you need that consistent, solid data engineering backbone to deliver that data out to the consumers. So that's one of the ways that you can ensure you have a trusted data foundation.
Sure, a pragmatic amount of mesh. However far you go down that path, you're going to need to have trust. You know, kind of even the full tenets of mesh. Unified governance is a thing that is just accepted no matter how much you're using it, and it's a big part of stuff. All right, who's next?
I can go next. I suppose the technology around it, providers like Microsoft and Databricks can give you capabilities like lineage, like data quality, like monitoring. You can have maybe data quality metrics in the lineage. You can see when you're self-serving, who's the owner of this table, who's the data steward of this data product, and so on and so forth. The technology will give you a lot of features that you can organize between yourselves to serve the data. But that said, more and more customers, more and more users that we've seen are more interested in the organizational changes of building that trust and building that, data products and data as a product sharing within the organization. So it's not just what the technology providers can do for you, it's also how do you organize the teams, how do you organize the processes around that. Do you have certain products certified? Do you have, again, certain people on call if anything breaks down? That kind of things matter. Just, the good old people process technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true, right? I mean, you talk data stewards, you mentioned, data curators, we talk data product owners. These are all people roles following a process that has to be embedded. And we've seen it lots. We've seen someone take an off-the-shelf governance tool and go, hey, people are now going to trust our data. But yeah, absolutely, without that legwork, without the effort, without the processes and that foundation, it's really hard to build that. Alrighty. Jim, Gavi, anything to add on, or shall we move on? Jim, go for it.
Go ahead, Gavi.
So, sorry, Jim. You put your hands up the same time as me. But anyway, in terms of AI, I think, picking from what Liping mentioned there about lineage, that's an important. It's become very, very important, especially working in GenAI. Understanding lineage, for example, using prompts, understanding how that's evolving through users using it, changing it ever so slightly to get the exact output from a GenAI application, for example. But apart from that, responsible AI, very, very, very important when you're thinking about implementing AI, baking it into your pilots from the get-go, right? Making sure you've got responsible AI and making sure all that is baked into your solution. It's very important.
And we're going to see more and more of that over the next year or so in terms of us. Yes, the technology support it and enable you to do proper responsible AI. But again, people need the processes and the trust, and they need to bake that into how they build the models. It's going to be huge. All right, round us off, Jim.
Just going to quickly add, I think transparency is critical, making sure humans are in the loop, and we can surface the telemetry and make everything observable. Just foundation to these complex systems, making them accessible to their human counterparts.
All right. So again, everyone agrees trust is pretty vital, right? Yeah. All righty. So I'm not seeing too many of the questions come in, so we're going to jump into one of our next ones. So security and privacy. So kind of sticking on the same topic, right? But yeah, trust is a big thing. But security, privacy, how do these things actually come in? But where do you see the next level of things coming along? So if people had the processes and people had the people, like what is the tech stuff that's going to change how we think about privacy? What are the innovations that we're seeing maybe right now, maybe we're going to be seeing in the next year or two that actually help us do it? How do we accelerate people's trust? Anyone have a vision?
My dog has joined.
It's fine, points to the dog.
Yeah, he does. He does like to talk. He has very important things to say about privacy and governance and controls. I think, there's going to be a lot of innovation in the AI space, particularly with the advent of agentic frameworks, right? We're going to have lots of agents deployed, particularly in large enterprises, but at all sizes of organizations. Different agents are going to be deployed to help identify leaks, exposures, risks in a much more consistent and effective manner. But I think, probably more in the short, medium term, just got Liping and Microsoft and Databricks work closely together. I think one of the things that customers will start to see, particularly given the announcements that we had at Ignite last week, will be that continuing integration of Databricks and Fabric working hand in hand, and Unity Catalog and Purview working alongside each other in a much more integrated out of the box manner, so that you've got that kind of easy deploy, easy to implement, easy to take advantage of. Back to what we were talking about in the first question, lots of organizations, they don't like spending a lot of time trying to network these things together and connect them. So I think one of the things that I would expect to see in the next calendar year is that tighter integration between the Databricks and the Microsoft stack to help enable the governance, controls, privacy, and security that everybody needs and absolutely is crying out for.
Yeah, hopefully if we work toward the point when we have open standards for governance, that's going to make everyone's lives much easier.
Indeed.
I will love it when I see it. Anyone else want to weigh in on that point?
I would echo what Richard said, right? Like we got features that help you to proactively manage your security access control by like giving you capabilities like ABAC, right? Like attribute-based access control, which you can tag certain tables, columns, schemas, and say this is PII. So I'm going to lock down access to these artifacts, whatever the artifact is. It can be access controlled based on the tag. And you got classification that you can run the scanning and identify the PII in your data. And then we also have things like auditability. You can see who has access to what when, particularly if something's PII, you want to audit that and make sure that the data doesn't get accessed by the wrong kind of people. So a lot of these capabilities exist already today. And like to Richard's point, we're using more and more integration between Databricks and Microsoft. We're using more and more AI capabilities to make your life easier in security and privacy front. But again, this is about, like educate yourself about these new capabilities that keep getting introduced by the providers, and use it appropriately based on your use case, based on your requirement. And I always say security in general is something that's not a shopping list. It's not that you should absolutely use everything just because we introduced like a long list of things. Just because we introduced like bring your own key doesn't mean you should have your own encryption key. So think about what your need is and then pick the feature that you need to secure your environment accordingly.
Very little nerdy aside right there, because I'm very excited about ABAC, the attribute-based access control. And no one's that excited about security, but I'm really excited about it, because for a long time, we built a lake, right? And it was based on how you stored your data, which is your security. If you want to change that, you need to make like another copy of your data in a different thing, and that made no sense. And then a SQL layer comes along, and that's fine, but it's still based on how you've secured it. So having like flexibility to have basically different vertical slices of security to actually reflect what people are doing as they try and federate and go for a distributed ownership. Hallelujah, been waiting for that kind of stuff. And we're seeing those kind of innovations finally catch up, so we can actually not have to bend our organizations to fit the limitations of the tech, which just makes sense. All right, Jim, Gavi, anything you want to weigh in on?
Just to add briefly, I'm sorry, Gavi. I was just going to say quickly, it's just about adaptability, right? It's trying to keep pace with the changing state of the platforms and making sure you're not designing monolithic processes to take advantage of all the great stuff coming out. Gavi, I'll kick it to you.
Yep, good point, Jim. I mean, talking about adaptability in terms of AI and in terms of how that's evolving, we use a lot of APIs now. And private link and VNets are two words that I've heard a lot this year. I mean, especially when it comes to GenAI stuff. So in terms of AI consultants or data scientists working with security experts a lot more, I think that's going to become norm in terms of making sure data security and privacy are implemented into AI.
Yeah, and incredibly important, right? Especially if people start, integrating GenAI to actually run their business processes, and it has very sensitive data baked into it. The ability to make sure that actually you're not creating, gaps in your data security, and by bringing in the new tech and the new innovation, just can't compromise on actually making sure that your data is protected, your customers' data is protected. Alrighty, so next question. There we go. Already lined up. Thank you, AV Elves. Very good. Real world value of GenAI. So Gavi, we touched on it a little bit, so I'll start on the other people away from you. But where we're seeing the true value, and there's a whole lot of debate about what the whole value of GenAI is. Is it saving time? Is it reducing workforce like the big fat cat execs want to do? Just fire everybody, make it just run by GenAI. Where are we actually going with this stuff? Where do we think the real benefit that maybe we haven't realized is? Who wants to go? It's a big meaty question.
I'm happy to go first again. For once. In insurance, it's a document heavy in the industry. So we are seeing quite a lot of benefits being driven from consuming and understanding complex kind of technical medical documentation like doctor's reports, like translating them into layman's, understanding policy information. They can be quite verbose, particularly in the specialty market. I think me personally, I do spend quite a significant amount of time helping them optimize. Now, I would call them kind of in Microsoft, we use all sorts of terminology, but one of them is like Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3. Those kinds of use cases are typically Horizon 1. Now, if you can imagine an end-to-end kind of business process that has an email or a PDF or some kind of interaction or some complex document that has to be understood and data extracted from it, we can save with those kinds of use cases, 20, 30 minutes in that kind of assessment of what the information that's came in and then producing an output at the end of it. And then when you start to multiply that up by, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 times in a year, the business cases them start to write themselves in terms of the value that's been driven. But more into Horizon 2 and 3, I'm starting to see more customers that are experimenting, I will say, with the kind of automated contact center. So initially, they'll start off with the kind of transcription of what has been discussed and extraction of key actions. And that can be really powerful when you're following up the next best action with that customer. What was the sentiment? Were they complaining? Was it an angry Scottish guy who didn't particularly like the bill that he got the other day? You can extract that information and you can drive better outcomes for the customer based on that. But the second phase of that is doing that in real time, understanding what's being said in real time and nudging the agent with the right responses. So, he's angry and he's Scottish, maybe talk about this thing, or maybe focus on the key values that, we know that Richard loves. I mean, I'm sure we weren't guessing who I was describing there in that example. But the third one, and I think this is the most interesting, is the kind of triaging using autonomous agents, AI agents, that can be trained to sound just like me or just like you, Simon, to kind of triage calls that are coming in. So more and more we're seeing companies with that kind of eye on the prize, which is a more expedited contact center handling, again, building on the better outcomes. And that's the typical way in which they kind of build out that capability. And I've got quite a number of customers that are kind of stage 2 or Horizon 2, because I see that is going to have a huge impact in the bottom line of customers, particularly in how much money they will save in real terms.
There's some really important points there, which are, it's not just about saving time. It's not just about going, it used to take someone an hour to go through this process. It now takes them 15 minutes. So they can do more calls. Yes, that is a big impact. It's huge, but there's more to it, because they're making better decisions. And if actually people can make a better call, and because they didn't have that information before, they've got the things at their fingertips, they can suddenly it's not just the decision was made faster, but better decisions are made, and they're getting to a result that is actually more optimized. These are the kind of use cases we're seeing, kind of the hidden value people aren't really considering yet.
And you think about
it, as exciting as it is, has so many of those use cases.
And I think the net promoter score indicators that you'll see out of the outcome of these kind of calls. Imagine a world where you phone up your bank or your insurance provider, and you're not faced with press option 1 for blah, press option 2. It's just, I have this problem, and the AI agent goes, okay, I know which AI agent I should pass you to that's been finally trained to deal with that specific claim handle or notification about it. It just makes that experience for customers much nicer than what it was. I'm sure there'll be initial kind of pushback on it, but I think as customers start to see the benefits of it, they will absolutely much more prefer to be dealt with an AI handled agent. Maybe not that sounds like me, but they can maybe pick their own voice.
But that scenario, sorry to keep banging on about insurance, but that scenario where you ring up and you talk to an AI and they go, oh yeah, cool. Based on all the information we've got, we'll settle it immediately, because actually they can make the better decision. And so me as a customer, I don't have to go through a lengthy process. And then suddenly I get a much better experience. There's so much of that across so many different industries that we haven't really started to figure out yet. It's crazy. Righty. Anyone else want to jump in the joys of value for AI?
So I'm going to move away from FSI for a second, and because I work in healthcare, life sciences mostly, and like the true value of GenAI is truly industry specific, right? So there are universal like productivity improvements you can do across every industry. Again, to Simon's point, it's not just time, it's also quality of things. Like my client had a GenAI note taker that's joined our call, and the quality of notes was way better than the notes I've written. I've written notes for as long as I've been alive. So that's really scary. That's, while I can maybe write a model that's better than AutoML, but I cannot beat GenAI in note-taking. But in healthcare life sciences, I see a lot of improvements that GenAI can do to this highly regulated industry that has a lot of area for improvement in terms of efficiencies. Drug discovery, R&D, clinical trial takes years and years to do. But with GenAI, you can shorten that cycle. You can introduce drugs to people sooner. You can save a lot of lives using that. You can save a lot of lives by saving 50% of the time that doctors today use to do follow-ups, write notes. That doctor can see double amount of customers, patients, if they can save all of the time writing notes assisted by AI. We have NHS writing, training a model or had a project called Foresight. They treated life events of I fell down the stairs, I had a heart attack, I turned 45. All of events like a GenAI phrase or sentence token. They predicted what's going to happen to you. Are you going to turn 61 first, or are you going to have a heart attack first? Now, this is not what traditional machine learning model does. This is GenAI prediction, predicting the next sentence, going, this is what's likely going to happen to you. Nobody in the world has the data sets that NHS has, and they can do creative things like that. And we're seeing more and more creative usage of GenAI models in that kind of areas than just a chatbot, than just a, like a conversation agent kind of things. So that's really cool. I think like things like that will revolutionize this industry and probably a lot of industries out there as well.
All right, yeah, I see how it is. Liping, me and Richard are talking about, making the poor insurance industry lots of money, and you're talking about saving everyone's lives. Fine, be like that.
Again, patients need insurers to pay for their medical bills. So we're one big happy family.
Yeah, it's an equilibrium between both. You have to balance it all the time.
All right. Rather than give you the choice, Jim, anything to jump in on there?
Yeah, I was just saying, in retail CPG, my background in enterprise, I think it's collapsing the distance between these systems of engagement and systems of record, right? Everything old is new again. So it's about equipping people with the right information at the right time. I look at examples based off my history at the Hershey Company. I had merchandisers walking into stores. Sometimes they'd spend 30, 45 minutes in a parking lot, furiously assembling KPIs and their punch lists and what the topics of the day were. You think now with generative AI, the ability to actually craft a custom message based off of your CRM data, the individual KDM that you're going to be talking to, the key decision maker in the store, operations managers, being able to identify where in the store you're going to want to walk based off this specific floor plan. Because I don't know how it is in Europe, but in the United States, every single Walmart store is different, and we love it. But it's challenging to know where to find things sometimes. So having a merchandiser be able to go into a store and identify what the critical path is, what they need to hit, specifically with the information to empower them to help drive the right product in the right place at the right time. I think it's a tremendous value add for operations managers, for folks in the supply chain and in retail consumer goods. So just tremendous opportunities to kind of collapse the information pipeline and get just in time.
Yeah, that's fake. I mean, retail CPG, we're seeing loads of things. I mean, the user experience, that the customer of retail, suddenly we're flooded with everywhere with the little buyer's assistants appearing places. Tell us what you're trying to do and we'll assemble a custom shopping list for you, suggest a recipe, and then it'll start filling your basket full of all your groceries. We're seeing huge amounts of things just appearing pretty much everywhere that saves me time, and it's not even paying for it, which again is a nice thing for me.
Yeah, and personalization and social presences, social media influencing, connecting all of these things to give really a tailored experience to your end consumer that's just trying to cut through the noise and figure out how to land that Thanksgiving turkey. So, or I guess on to Christmas now, holiday feast.
All right, Gary, with the value of GenAI, but obviously you know lots about it. What would you pick out as the key drivers?
I mean, I think there's loads to talk about. I can be here all day talking about the value of GenAI, but I just wanted the opportunity to touch on the augmentation of GenAI within humans, and that's the kind of question we get from a lot of our customers, right? In terms of the fear of GenAI overtaking people's jobs, but really, for me, the magic is GenAI really has a potential of augment human workflow, right? It's not here to overtake people. It's not here to overtake companies. It's not here to replace people at all. It's here to empower humans to do their jobs better, make faster decisions, all the stuff that we spoke about, all the stuff that Richard, Leiping, and Jim spoke about. So huge value.
And so for the audience, so thank you, Simon, for putting it in. Customers raising any concerns with OpenAI going for profit? So customers leaning towards open source or closed source large language models. And there's a big difference, right? You know, in terms of the amount of money, the amount of cost taken to train the OpenAI models compared to the ones that we're actually seeing go out and then pumped into the open source model. There's a difference in quality, there's a difference in speed, there's a difference in cost of using them. So what are we actually seeing in industry? Where are we seeing people leaning to? It'd be interesting, the Microsoft and Databricks views on this. Go around. Richard, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, no worries. Happy to. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So there's not any, we're not really seeing much customer pushback with OpenAI going public in that regard. So customers are more focused on the security of their data and where it's being sent to and where it's coming back from when they're using these LLMs. That's probably their biggest challenge. Who's providing them? Now, we provide Microsoft. OpenAI is just one of the many models that we provide. So we have, don't quote me on this, but I'm sure it's like 1,700 plus models are available in the model catalog that are small language models, large language models, richer tuned. I'm kidding, they don't exist, that one. But there's lots and lots of models. And I think most organizations are probably still struggling to get their head around how do we assess that? How do we know which is the right one? And that's where tools within the Microsoft stack can help. And I know Databricks have a very similar capability too. And I want to speak for Leiping, but I think it's more important for customers to start to get their head around that there isn't going to be one generic model that fits for every purpose that you're going to use. Sure, the big ones from Meta, OpenAI will probably do a good job on a broad spectrum of use cases. But my vision and the vision that we have internally at Microsoft is customers will have a plethora. I used to call it like a charcuterie of LLMs, right? You just have this collection of LLMs that are very specifically tuned, like the agentic frameworks that Gavi was mentioning earlier on, that are built specifically to deliver tasks. So you think about like one of the things that we've got internally, that's an external thing that you can read up about is, I need to get the name right, AutoGen. Just have to get that word right because there's another name for it internally. And AutoGen is like, how do you fully automate like bug fixing within the software dev lifecycle? So that will look at a bug and generate it. Now that uses a bunch of collection of different agents within the LLMs, and each of those LLMs will be different. So to answer the question very long-windedly, nobody's particularly worried about the OpenAI transition. They're more focused on that security aspect of how they deploy their data, their LLMs, and more looking to the future. We're trying to help customers envision a future where they just have that kind of menu of different LLMs to help deliver the kinds of use cases they want to do and ensure that they're assessing them before to pick the right one and continually assessing them once they go into production to make sure that they're providing the same output, the same consistent outputs ongoing. And you need to build that really quick muscle internally to be able to assess a new model to say, is this better or more cost effective than my previous model? So that kind of muscle of looking at an LLM, assessing it quickly against your current stack and making a decision, they're the things that we are working closely with customers to build that muscle out. And obviously I do it quite closely with my good friends at Advancing Analytics as well. So like that is, I think that's the key thing that they need to be doubling down on, is focusing on building that capability.
And that is tricky, right? Because a lot of it comes down to your expectation of your users. If you have a bunch of small models, they tend to have as narrow a scope of what they're going to be good at. And if people try and use it like they go to, ChatGPT and use OpenAI and just try and treat it like a generalist, very large proprietary model, they're going to have a different experience than something that is built as a very small, very focused model. But part of that is about just actually building those expectations. If you have a bunch of agents, you speak to your HR agent and it's very narrow and focused and good at that. It's not just a one catches all. But that setting expectations is something that's still evolving. People haven't quite got that. When do you do it? How do you do it? It's a growth as we kind of get used to having those selections of models, right? Anyone else? Li-Ping, want to weigh in?
We don't care. Use DBRX if you want. The idea is, I think both Microsoft and Databricks is trying to build the capabilities to help you productionize your architecture in GenAI, whether it's chained, it's RAG, whatever it is. We're trying to build all the features in there for you, like playground evaluation data set, everything to help you evaluate the performance of the model better, performance of your end-to-end architecture better, so you can productionize your implementation as fast as possible. The idea is we're building Formula One cars. These models, these endpoints are Formula One drivers. If they're not performing, you can swap it out. If OpenAI gets too expensive, you can swap it out. You can, the drivers are more dispensable than the cars itself. You want to build I don't know how much a car goes these days, probably 20 million or more. But the idea is you want to build a robust car and then pick whichever driver fits the task the most, and not I'm going to go for this driver and then build a car that's fit for that driver, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. And there's going to be so much change. And so what you're saying is we can treat AI as horrendously dispensable and just get rid of models that we don't like and chop it around. I'm saying that just to offend Gavi.
You are. I am offended.
So Gavi, anything on your side you want to kind of on the OpenAI?
Yeah, I don't think that ever comes into an argument when we work with our customers. I like to add one point to Richard. So Richard mentioned security and performance. Third, for us, is cost. So those are the three things we tend to evaluate, but not whether it's open source or closed source.
All right, cool. Jim, anything to add on the end?
Just quickly to add, cost predictability is paramount. As we look at, one point is as OpenAI is going for profit, just seeing what that does, the underlying token cost, and how that could add in potentially to long-term costs beyond just training into actual utilization.
Yeah, and it's a big consideration when you're adopting it and you're building it. And if you fine-tuned, then you're slightly more locked into than if you're just calling a web service and you're building that into a framework. And that is another kettle of fish in terms of how much you're going to be working with that stuff. But yeah, there's a lot in there. Quick fire final question. Okay, good. I was gonna wrap it up anyway. Quick fire question. That's not a quick fire question. What is the big significant advancement in data and AI that you think is going to be coming? So essentially, in a couple of sentences, no more, what is the big thing? What do you think is the thing that in 2 to 3 years is going to be at the top of the hype curve that everyone's suddenly racing to talk about? If you go to a tech expo and it currently says every single product is AI native, AI powered, AI driven, what's going to be the next big thing? We'll go around in that list. Richard, what is the thing on your list?
I think the advent of the agentic frameworks, and the co-pilots that we have will start to adopt more of those agentic frameworks. So think about, I think somebody asked the question earlier on about, are dashboards dead? I think they're teetering on the brink. And I say that as a business intelligence professional for a long, long time. I think the way in which people interact with data will change dramatically over the next 5 to 10 years. People want information. They don't necessarily want to see graphs all the time. So I think that shift away. But just thinking about data platforms in general, how you ingest data, how you connect and build those pipelines, all of those things will become natural language driven. With the right setup, the right configuration and controls, I think you'll start to see the big change being the most successful people in the data world will be those who have the best ideas, have the biggest visions, and they're really creative and take full advantage of those agentic frameworks to build really cool things that maybe they just didn't have the technical know-how to build. I'm not saying that's coming next year, but I would definitely see it on the horizon over the next 3 to 5.
So it's more about how agentic frameworks are going to just change a lot of the rest of our jobs as well, and we're going to see things. The agentic data engineer, I mean, as sad as it is, it's going to come. We're going to see a period of acceleration. So yeah, we get copilots, we get tools. It means we can do our job faster. But when it gets to a point when it can basically do my job, then you get to a point of going, oh, just go and create this for me. And it's going to make everything more accessible, and it's going to change how we work in the next few years. All right, Leaping, what's yours?
That sounds scary. I'm going to work as hard as I can in the next 5 years and then retire. No, so I think data products is probably going to take off. There's a lot of our customers are talking about building new products based on the data, the insights, the AI models, the machine learning models they're producing, like both internally and externally, both commercial and non-commercial. I think there's going to be a lot of data product or products powered by data and AI that's put out there by these companies that traditionally sits on loads and loads and loads of data that don't know what to do about it. I think that's going to take off. Yeah.
All right, cool. Now, as I said, like in the keynote, it's already building. We're already seeing lots of people trying to adopt it, but it's in such the early stages. So the maturity around it, suites of products around it, basically whole methodologies of how you do it. There's a lot of churn, a lot of people coming up with it, a lot of vibrations in industry currently. As what we're going to see it settle on, it's going to be, we'll see what comes out in the next couple of years. All right, Jim, what about yourself?
For me, industry-specific data modeling and quality control. I think it's a key challenge trying to, once you've actually defined all the pipelines, you've automated ingestion, you do all the right things that we know how to do, then it comes to quickly assembling the data models for those data products and ensuring quality to build trust. So I see that ever on the rise.
Oh, imagine it. So currently, I mean, you can get the industry-style data models. You can go and pick out, is it art? Things like that, kind of the canonical data model that has absolutely everything that can possibly be made. And then you spend years trying to plug your data so it actually fits. But imagine if you could pick off a little off-the-shelf model and then tell your AI assistant, fit my data into this model and make it work. I mean, that's kind of terrifying. I hadn't even thought about that. But so many things we can do to actually then start accelerating and go, now that my data's in the right shape, I can just plug in a load of off-the-shelf models and off we go. That's crazy.
Decreases time to value.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why we're here. All right. Gary, final comments.
Yep, for me, I agree with Richard, right? Everyone in the AI world is talking about AGI, and agentic workflow is definitely stepping in the right direction towards achieving AGI. So that's it from me.
So reaching the point when AI starts building itself and then we reach the singularity and AI takes over. Yeah, I mean, sounds like a plan. That'll be on the hype curve. When that happens, I'll be in the trough of disillusionment, so it'll be fine. We'll be okay. All right, so thank you, panelists, for joining us. Thank you for sharing all of your amazing insights. Thanks for the folks in the comments throwing some questions our way. So I think at this point, I'm just going to invite Terry back on for some closing remarks, and then, we'll wrap things up. So cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. Huge thank you to all of our panelists and to Simon for hosting that panel. I think so. There's a reason why we call this event Advancing Innovation. And what I hope today you're taking away from this event is really thinking about how you can take what you've learned and apply it to your business and to your customers. Really thinking about how do you apply those trends that Simon looked at initially, really as we're seeing innovation being driven across our entire industry, how are you taking that and going to apply that to your business? When we've looked at, how are we building out trust? Trust is definitely a theme going throughout the whole day today. And I think when we look at how we really leverage generative AI and everything else going into the future, as Gavi mentioned, rubbish in, rubbish out, right? AI platforms built on top of a well-trusted base platform is only going to set you up for huge success in the future. And so we talked a lot about generative AI, this shift towards things like generative BI as well around data products, and a huge amount of very, very interesting topics. So I thought there were a load of really great comments made in the panel. You know, I'm particularly looking forward to angry Scottish generative AI models coming onto the market very, very soon. So, you know, and I particularly enjoyed a guest appearance from Richard's small dog. So loads of great stuff happening today. So just really want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you very much to everyone who attended, who asked a great question. You'll be able to get all of these videos, presumably on our YouTube and various other platforms, and we'll share them as much as we possibly can do. So if you found something really useful today, please do share that with your team, share that with your friends, share it with your neighbors. We don't mind. Share it with whoever you think it would be useful for. And if there was something today that you saw that you thought, you know what, that's what we're trying to do, we're really struggling with that adoption of data products. We really have been dabbling with generative AI and we want to go further, and we really want to start leveraging things like Advancing Analytics Generate framework, then do get in touch, okay? So reach out to us across platforms, drop us an email. We're more than happy to kind of walk you through a lot of the ways that we're really helping customers drive and advance innovation in their own projects and across their own customers. So a huge thank you for all of your attention today, and we'll see you at the next Advancing Innovation. All right, bye.